Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Madara Was Sealed Inside Naruto Part 9. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
After a week. Konoha, it was almost midnight. A week had gone by since Saito had eavesdropped on the Hokage and Jiraiya's meeting, during which he learned a great deal. Itachi worked for Orochimaru and was a member of Akatsuki. For someone like him, that was one of the biggest surprises of his life, which was noteworthy. The thought of all the cruel revelations and surprises he had already experienced in Naruto's 12 years of life made him smile. He had learned that he possessed both the Kyuubi and Madara Uchiha, one of the most formidable and malevolent ninja in history. After learning that his father was the Yondaime, he died, enclosing the two inside of him. Madara had informed him, and Kakashi had verified, that Itachi had killed his brother and sensei Shisui Uchiha, as well as the rest of his clan and family. To make this list of surprises even more impressive, he discovered a week ago that Itachi, who had vanished from the world, had joined Akatsuki. He shook his head, enjoying the way the wind blew through his blonde hair. At the moment, he was perched atop the Hokage monument, Naruto's favorite hangout and the location of his former residence after being expelled from the orphanage. He couldn't help but think about the conflicting feelings that swept through him as he gazed down at the enormous village below. He detested this village because it was the one that had killed the Senju, the one that had forced Itachi to kill the Uchiha, and, if Madara was correct, the one that would eventually attempt to murder the remaining bloodline ninja. However, he had a deep affection for Konoha. He had always imagined growing up in this village with Sasuke and Hinata, his two closest friends. Naruto was supposed to lead the Anbu, and Sasuke was supposed to become the Hokage. However, that was no longer feasible. Since Itachi was now a member of Akatsuki, Sasuke would have to kill Itachi before he could become the Hokage, which would be a lifelong commitment. Furthermore, Naruto had to develop the strength to administer justice because he could no longer afford to be a ninja in Konoha. Madara seemed to believe that killing the entire village would resolve the issue, but Saito questioned what justice actually meant. The entire village wasn't corrupt after all, so there had to be another way. Just a few council members. Naruto would not betray the village as long as the village did not betray him. Saito was certain of that. Without Madara lurking in the background of his subconscious, it felt weird to be thinking all of this. In fact, he had not realized that Madara was part of the real Naruto, not Saito, until he had waited for Madara to express his thoughts. He was merely a clone of a shadow. There was a lot more activity than usual in the village below him. This made sense because ninja from all over the country were traveling to Konoha to either take part in or watch the Chunin exams, which were scheduled to begin in about a week. Saito had already spotted ninja from almost every main village in Konoha, with the exception of AIM, strolling through the streets. For a second, he wondered how many genin AIM would send. They most likely wouldn't even show up until the exams began, but there was no hard and fast minimum. Saito envisioned that he was not alone in his curiosity about the group. Any Akatsuki ninja who visited Konoha would be treated like celebrities. They would likely be surrounded by crowds of people who wanted to learn more about the secretive. Saito whirled around as his heart leapt. He had just been struck by a wave of chakra so strong and malevolent that he had to fight the impulse to flee. He wasn't accustomed to being caught off guard, and who could be searching for him atop the monument? To his astonishment, despite the fact that the person standing a considerable distance behind him appeared to be a child of his age, he failed to recognize them. The strong chakra he sensed emanating from this child, strange as it was, seemed almost nostalgic. He knew before either of them said anything, before Saito even inquired about his name. He was fully aware of this red-haired ninja's identity. "You're, like me, visions and dreams." It started to rain. With a worried expression on her face, Hinata raised her gaze to the sky. Though it didn't happen often in Konoha, she detested it when it did. She looked around, eager to get inside, but first she had to figure out where she was. She proceeded across the lawn until she came to a boundary. Glancing around, she realized she was atop the Hokage monument right away. But why was she here in the middle of a downpour? Thunder erupted with a loud boom as lightning shot across the sky. Surprised, Hinata dropped to the ground, suddenly fearing for her own life. Why was she in this area? She squinted her eyes through the rain to look at the monument cliff's edge when she heard a sudden noise coming from the side. At first, it was difficult to spot, but she eventually recognized a person approaching her. It was only when that individual was near her that she realized it was Naruto. She got to her feet and started to run toward him, but something stopped her. The eyes of Naruto were. She started to remember all of a sudden, and her eyes widened. No, it couldn't be. This was the vision, the dream, that Naruto was leaving her. She needed to stop him. Naruto said, so you found out that it was me who killed her, with a blank expression. I thought you would. No matter, you can't stop me now. Naruto, please. She yelled at him through the cloud cover. You can't leave the village. Naruto gave a gloomy laugh. Don't play stupid. I'm leaving Konoha for good, and when I return, it'll be to burn this place to the ground, in the blackest of flames. I can't stay here, Naruto added, glancing sideways at the village. Especially after killing her. I have no other choice. I'm finally leaving this sickening place, and I'm leaving you too. Hinata's horrified eyes widened once more. Naruto-kun, she yelled, you promised me. You promised me that you would never leave me. With no emotion on his face, Naruto shook his head. I can't stay here, Hinata. I already told you that. I have to leave. Haku was right. Without a purpose, living life is meaningless. But I have a purpose now. He helped me find it. Hinata's world fell apart as she looked down at her own hands. Nothing she said was effective. He would never be persuaded by her. She said to him, take me with you, as she met his red eyes. Naruto, I'll abandon everything for you. I'll leave Konoha to be with you. Naruto's ice mask broke for the first time since the conversation started, and his face briefly displayed shock. You would abandon Konoha as a whole for me. Will you abandon everything? As the tears streamed down her face, Hinata grinned and nodded, saying, Naruto, of course. My best friend, the best friend I could ever have, is you. I can't express how much you've helped me, and I'll stop at nothing to stay with you. Naruto's emotionless mask broke completely, and he looked down at his hands while his head continued to shake and his lips moved silently, almost as if he were speaking to someone. Hinata recalled this instance in which she nearly persuaded Naruto to allow her to accompany him, but it appeared as though he was speaking with someone who persuaded him to leave her. Hinata rushed forward and embraced Naruto, wrapping her arms around him without waiting for that moment to arrive. She yelled, please, Naruto-kun, as tears filled her eyes. You agreed. I don't care what you're doing or where you're heading. With a tear in his eye, Naruto gazed down at Hinata and said, Hinata-chan, You are too important to me, she went on, don't abandon me. For a brief moment, Naruto stayed motionless and did not even return Hinata's embrace as she sobbed into his chest. Hinata looked up into his icy eyes and was shocked to see that his Sharingan was no longer there, but rather that she was looking into a pair of his naturally blue eyes. I'm sorry, Hinata-chan, he said at last. You mean too much to me too, that's why you can't come with me. This couldn't be happening, she couldn't lose him. She felt as though her own heart had been torn from her chest, and the pressure was so great that it was almost impossible to breathe. Hinata's heart broke with the rest of her world, again. Abruptly, Naruto vanished, and she staggered ahead with nothing to grasp. The voice behind her said, close your eyes, Hinata, and when you wake up, I'll be gone. She kept sobbing and slowly closed her eyes as he instructed. She didn't want to do so, she wanted to stay awake and flee with him, but she had no other option. I will return for you. That's what I've promised now. How can I have faith in you? She returned the whisper, you broke your promise. Hinata felt his breath on her neck, and there was silence. You can't. Hinata, have courage. As he said, she tried to be strong by holding her breath, squinting her overflowing eyes shut, and suppressing her sobs. Suddenly, there was darkness. Rain was falling, and Hinata's face was filled with anxiety. Rain didn't fall often in Konoha, but when it did, she detested it. She looked around, wanting to go inside, but first she needed to know where she was. She walked along the grass until she came to an edge, and when she looked over, she saw that she was standing atop the Hokage monument. Why would she be here in the middle of a downpour? A flash of lightning swept across the sky, and then thunder roared, and Hinata dropped to the ground, startled and now concerned for her own safety. Why was she out here? She had always wanted to believe that this dream was unattainable because Naruto had never had a Sharingan, but now she realized that she knew where she was and what was going to happen. This was the terrifying vision that would haunt her dreams, the one in which Naruto would leave the village and leave her. When she heard a noise from the side, she squinted her eyes through the rain to look at the edge of the monument cliff, expecting to see Naruto standing there. She could see the shadow of a figure, but something wasn't quite right, so she got up and ran toward it, wondering what was different, but she was frozen in her tracks when the figure turned to stare at her. Her heart twisted in shock and fear as the dark, crimson eyes met her own. Those eyes, no please, no. Hinata, Sasuke Uchiha, wearing the dark tunic of the Uchiha clan, spoke smoothly into the night, his hands in his pockets, and he turned slowly back to face the village below them. His eyes were cold, the same kind of cold that she remembered seeing in Naruto in every vision she had. After a long moment of silence, Sasuke turned back to face her, his expression emotionless, and said, "So you figured out that I'm going to leave Konoha? I thought you would. Before Naruto also left the village, you were the last person to see him. What he said to you, you never told me." A little taller than she remembered, and with a slightly lower voice, Sasuke claimed that Naruto had already left the village. How much time had passed? Hinata was at a loss for words as she felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Hinata, you know I have to do this," sighed Sasuke. "Justice must be served for Naruto. Hinata, he killed her. He took her life. He left the two of us after I witnessed him murder her in front of me. Konoha also believes it was me." His eyes started to well up with tears, but his expression stayed icy and his voice remained firm. "I can't forgive him," he said. "Furthermore, I no longer give a damn about this village. Konoha is preventing me from becoming stronger. Naruto took her after Itachi took my family away from me. I will locate them, and I'll give them the justice they're due." No matter how often she saw the dreams, it didn't get any easier for Hinata, who sat up in bed, clutching her sheets and crying uncontrollably. Regardless of what she said or how she said it, Naruto and Sasuke would always leave her. But why? Why was she even experiencing these dreams? As she wiped away her tears with her sleeve, she looked at the stuffed fox doll next to her, a gift she had carried with her since leaving the orphanage all those years ago, and a smile slowly spread across her face as she recalled the carefree days she spent with Naruto. A lot had happened between then and now, including their separation into opposing clans, but now she was sleeping in her own home in the Senju compound and seeing Naruto every day again, just like old times. Everyone would be perfect except for the dreams she kept having, which served as a constant reminder that nothing would last. She was sleeping in Tezuna's house, in the middle of a mission in Weeb, and it suddenly hit her that she wasn't supposed to be in her bed in the Senju compound. This meant that this was just another dream or vision, and it was the first time she had ever experienced so many consecutive visions, as if her brain was putting all of the visions she had had so far, first Naruto leaving the village, then Sasuke leaving the village, together. In this dream, Neji somehow entered her house in the middle of the night, followed by Naruto. She sat up and got out of bed, looking down at her body, which, as she had predicted, was different from what it usually was. It felt different and looked different. She was a little taller, and she felt lighter, stronger, and more experienced. She sat back on the bed and quickly tried to piece together the information while she was still in the vision. She had had this particular dream a number of times before, but she had never given it much thought until now. After having the other two visions, it was beginning to make sense to her. Because her body was the same in both of the other visions, it was likely that this one took place years after Naruto and Sasuke left the village, meaning that in this reality and this vision, Naruto and Sasuke had left the village for a number of years after Naruto allegedly killed someone. Neji had arrived, and Hinata's head shot up when she heard a distant, muffled creaking sound of a door opening. Her house was old, one of the oldest in Konoha, being a Senju house, so every time she opened a door or walked through the hallways, the wood would creak. She had just stepped out of her room and into the hallway when she saw the shadow of a figure far at the end and squinted to try to identify it, but it wasn't until it stepped in front of a beam of moonlight streaming in through one of the windows that she realized who it was. Her suspicion that this vision occurred years after the other two was confirmed when Neji appeared in the center of the hallway, taller than she remembered him, wearing loose robes that hung lightly over his figure, with short, dark hair and a cloth wrapped around his eyes that seemed to blind him. His voice was quiet but clear. "I've come for you, Hinata-sama," and he said, "I've been sent here to kill you." Knowing that Neji was about to depart, Hinata wasted no more time. She recalled what Naruto had told her in a future vision, the one in which she was with him in the woods, which was most likely the next, that Neji's treatment of her family was justice, and now was her chance to learn the truth. "Neji." Trying to sound strong and assured, she yelled into the hallway, What did you do to our family? How have you treated the Hyuga?" Neji smiled a little and started to approach Hinata, his steps confident and somehow silent on the ancient, creaking wooden floor. Hinata attempted to back away, but as before, she was shocked to find that her feet were frozen to the floor. Ice literally covered them, and no matter how hard she pulled, she was unable to get them off. When Neji eventually got to Hinata, he was standing 5 feet ahead of her, and for some reason, She could feel his chakra from here. She was surprised to find out how strong it felt. The Hyuga, Neji said. Despite the cloth covering his eyes, she could feel them looking into her soul. The Hyuga are not your family, Neji went on, stepping forward once more. You may share half of our blood, but even with your eyes, you will never be a Hyuga. I am now the only living Hyuga, and our cherished council sent me here to murder you. Hinata's body pounded with fear. No, that couldn't be real. Neji had. Don't look at me like that. Suddenly, his composed composure lost in rage. He yelled at her, I don't need your sympathy. In any case, I would have done it. I was betrayed by the Hyuga. My father was murdered by the main branch, who have persecuted my branch since the clan's founding. In addition, my own branch declined to support me in my time of need and to stand with me in my battle against the main branch. All of this is due to you. Due to the fact that you killed my father all those years ago. Yes, Hinata, I was sent here to kill you, but just like before, I would have done so whether or not the council had given me the order. There was silence as Neji drew nearer to her once more. Hinata would have truly feared for her life if she hadn't already witnessed a version of this vision. His voice was filled with pain and regret as he said, however, I want nothing more than to kill you, but Naruto. Hinata, he has saved you once more. He has done so even after leaving the village. The ice around Hinata's legs started to melt as he turned back to face her after he snapped his head to the left and peered through the wall with what Hinata thought was the Byakugan. And just like that, he's returned, he said, laughing to himself. This is a moment of fate. Even though they are so close to me, the two people I want to kill the most are so far away. After turning around, he started to move quickly away from her and faded into the darkness, turning around again just before he vanished and saying, Tell Naruto, tell him that he's next. With the power he has given me, I may not be able to hurt you, but I will kill him. Hinata wasted no time in running to the end of the hallway and down the stairs, heading for the garden at her house. She slid the door open and stepped out onto the garden porch, where the full moon illuminated the entire greenery almost unrealistically, causing her to pause and gaze in awe for a moment. Her garden was so gorgeous, full of amazing trees, bushes, and nearly hundreds of flowers. Naruto, she walked forward, feeling as though the chakra coming from the figure was so inviting, so recognizable. Her head stopped turning when her eyes fell on a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the grassy clearing, looking up at the moon with his back to her, hair blowing lightly with the breeze. He turned around, and though she knew what was coming, she flinched when her eyes met the cold crimson of his Sharingan, and she stopped as soon as she could identify the familiar blonde hair. Naruto said, It's been a while, Hinata-chan, in a voice that was lower than usual, darker, and devoid of warmth. He appeared so different now that she could see him clearly, taller, with longer hair and a completely different outfit, aside from his crimson eyes staring into her. Unsure of what to say, she stammered out, and Naruto, realizing that this Naruto was several years older than the one she knew. Several years older than the Naruto who had left Konoha. But. You kept your promise, you came back. In a flash of movement, Naruto was standing directly beside her, shoulder to shoulder, facing the opposite direction, rather than in front of her. I hope Neji didn't cause you any harm. When Hinata said a barely audible, hi, Naruto grinned and asked, placing his hand on her shoulder and speaking directly into her ears. But he didn't hurt me, she said to him quietly, but I think he killed the Hyuga clan, Neji. Naruto grinned broadly and said, he did, of course. I was observing him to see how strong he had become and to make sure he hadn't hurt you. Like Itachi, he was a wise choice for the council. However, I don't think Neji will accompany Akatsuki. He most likely wants to murder me as well. Sasuke first, then Neji. There are some dangerous ninjas who are out to get me. After turning around so that he was fully behind her, he put his chin on her shoulder so that their cheeks were almost touching and gently put his arms around her stomach. Hinata felt her face getting hotter. This embrace made her unable to move, but even if she could. Naruto said, close your eyes, without having to say it aloud. Somewhere in Hinata's mind, a warning signal went off, and she realized that she couldn't resist and that she had to close her eyes. In the final moments she had her eyes open, she saw and felt the world around her gradually fade away. The last sound she heard before everything went black was, I've fulfilled my commitment, Hinata-chan. I've returned to get you, now bid Konoha farewell. I'm bringing you along. The first thing she heard before opening her eyes was the gentle sound of nature all around her, from the rustle of leaves to the soft chirping of distant birds, and then she was overcome by the wonderful scent of the outdoors, which made her feel completely at home. Justice. Seated erect against a tree, Hinata gazed around, taking in her surroundings. She was in a lovely forest, with sunlight peeking through the top of the canopy, and she felt well rested. Hinata, do you think that justice exists? She briefly shook her head clear and turned to face Naruto, who was leaning coolly against a tree a few meters ahead of her, his arms crossed, staring straight at her. She fought the impulse to recoil as she made contact with his Sharingan. This was it, the last vision. The same outfit he wore in the previous vision, along with his longer blonde hair, he pushed off the tree with ease and started to approach her. Do you think justice is what happened to the Uchiha clan? Do you think Neji's treatment of your family was fair? She was perplexed. What was he talking about? She started to get to her feet, but then she noticed that her hands and feet were bound together. Was justice served when Neji spared your life? Do you think I treated Sasuke fairly? Akatsuki. Is it fair? Now that he was standing right in front of her, he snapped his fingers, and a little gust of wind came from beneath her, pushing her to her feet. She would have been shocked, but she was too focused on the fact that she was inches from Naruto, who was, after all, nearly a head taller than her. He grabbed her chin and pushed her face against his. Do you think my eyes are fair? That before he gouged out my eyes, Itachi had to take a kunai to his best friend's face and gouge out his eyes? Although Hinata was aware of what was about to happen, she was more composed than she had been the last time she experienced this vision. She knew that Naruto and Sasuke had fled from Konoha and Itachi had massacred the Uchiha, and that Naruto had spared her life from Neji, who had killed the Hyuga clan but not her. Who is Haku, Naruto? Whom did you murder? You did what to Sasuke? After giving her an odd look, Naruto stepped back a few paces and said, Did you forget? After all, I needed to give Sasuke a reason to fight me. For now, though, none of that matters. You've been abducted by me, and you're going to be crucial to the future. Kakashi and the Anbu will find us soon if we don't keep moving, he said, grinning and taking in the scent of the forest surrounding them. However, I can now take as much time as I want to unwind because, for the first time, I'm not following my sensei around anymore. It's an odd sensation. You know, he was like a father to me. Every time I get close to someone in a family, it seems like fate takes them away from me. Before the Uchiha and now him, I was an orphan. Hinata-chan, what a horrible cycle. It hurts so much. There is a lot of pain. He turned around to face her again, and as if he had opened up to her, his eyes suddenly froze again, staring at her with a grim resolve. Hinata, I'm going to break this cycle. I'm going to put an end to all of the pain, hate, and lies. I need you now more than ever because you owe me your life. You and I are going to destroy Akatsuki together. I will kill Yahiko for his actions, and after I have counterbalanced the hatred, I will restore world peace. In the ashes of a dark, dark flame, a world was born again. Justice must be served. Country of Waves. After a week had gone by since Zabuza had attacked their group, Kakashi had woken up and their training cycle had gradually resumed, albeit with some modifications. After all, Kakashi was still recovering to some extent, and Kimamaro's presence in their group was, to put it mildly, odd. In a sense, Kimamaro had replaced Kakashi in training, and Naruto, Sasuke, and Hinata would fight against him whenever they had spared or practiced team battles. The white-haired Akatsuki bounty hunter claimed that Kimamaro was nearly indestructible, and Naruto wouldn't have believed it until he attempted to run a kunai through him out of desperation and discovered that he might as well have just stabbed a steel wall. The teen's movements were quick enough to block all of their attacks with relative ease, making him the ideal sparring partner. Hinata could practice landing all of her pressure point attacks, and Kimamaro could keep walking as if she were just tickling him. That is, if he could actually get to Kimamaro. In fact, sparring with Kimamaro felt like sparring with Kakashi. Naruto scowled for a moment as he gazed at the scene before him, where Kimamaro had just flipped over a speeding fireball and was now obstructing all of Hinata's Juken advances. Hinata had recently had another vision, and this time it seemed different, telling him that not only had he left the village, but Sasuke had also left, and even worse, that Neji had also left the village after killing the Hyuga clan. Naruto didn't know how to take this, and Hinata didn't tell anyone else besides him. He knew why. It was a crazy idea, and Naruto himself was inclined not to believe her. As the training came to an end, Naruto found himself in the clearing with Kimamaro, while the others had gone back to Tezuna's house to prepare lunch. Naruto wanted to return as well, but he chose to use the opportunity to speak with the Akatsuki ninja alone instead. He and Kimamaro weren't exactly friends. There were too many boundaries for that to happen, but they got along well. After all, he only needed to survive this mission in Wave and worry about everything else later. Naruto chose to start the conversation by approaching the seated Kimimaro and saying, "I think it's stupid that you're going to be competing in the Chunin exams." The white-haired teenager smiled candidly, indicating that he truly agreed. As Naruto sat beside him, he replied, "Well, it's not like I had much of a choice." Although he was clearly skilled, Naruto could see that he was still breathing heavily, which gave the impression that he was more human than usual. "The Amekage specifically chose me. This is going to be the first time Akatsuki represents itself in the Chunin exams after all," he said. After a few minutes of sitting in silence, both of their breathing eventually returned to normal, and Kimimaro finally turned to face Naruto with a wry smile. He began hesitantly, "You know," and then turned back with the same expression on his face. "I'm not sure why, but you remind me of the Amekage. You both look the same in your eyes, but I don't think it's because of his spiky hair or the fact that he's much taller than you. More so than Sasuke, it's a look of caring or something, rather than just pain or hurt." Even though I probably sound foolish, I felt compelled to bring it up. Knowing the importance of what Kimimaro had just said, Naruto chose to remain silent, which is unusual for him around Kimimaro. The Akatsuki bounty hunter would frequently discuss Akatsuki's systems in a fairly open manner, but he had never mentioned anything about specific members, particularly the Amekage. He didn't really give Naruto any information at the moment, but stating that Naruto had the same expression in his eyes as the Amekage was significant. Kimimaro is an Akatsuki commander. Naruto had mastered the art of keeping his face straight and unchanging when speaking with his prisoner, and it was a good thing, because it took a lot of effort to turn away calmly and look up at the sky as if nothing had just been said to him. Naruto had to work hard to avoid openly gawking or even laughing at what Madara had just told him. "I hope you're willing to explain," was Naruto's mental reply. Madara went on, clearly anticipating a response. "I've made the connections between everything you've let slip by you. He is a prodigy, to start. I've witnessed Kimimaro and Kakashi spar with you, and I can assure you that this boy's taijutsu is superior to even your sensei's. Second, it's clear from everything we've learned from him that no random Akatsuki member would feel so at ease disclosing details about the group. Only a superior would do that. Most significantly, he just demonstrated to you that he has a personal connection to the Amekage. Kimimaro has spent enough time with the Amekage to be trusted with killing an A- ranked ninja, to have taken the Chunin exams, and to have enough time to not have to worry about giving away information. You don't just look at him as he passes by and see pain and compassion in his eyes. A commander is Kimimaro." Madara was usually right about this, so Naruto was inclined to believe him. However, if he was right, and Kimimaro was a commander, that meant Naruto was sitting next to someone who had been a part of Akatsuki since its inception, someone who had supposedly been handpicked by the Amekage. Naruto swallowed hard, still trying not to show any change in emotion. "Want to witness something amazing?" When Kimimaro held up his hand, pointing his index finger out with his thumb up, as if holding a gun, Naruto's thoughts were abruptly interrupted. Before he could respond or ask Kimimaro anything, a bolt of lightning erupted from his finger, causing a small explosion to go off several paces in front of them. Whack! Ignoring the fact that Kimimaro was laughing at his reaction, Naruto backed up and covered his face as the tree he was pointing at exploded at its base, sending bark and debris flying into the air. His eyes were wide as he looked back at the tree and saw a hole the size of a watermelon near the base, but even more shocking was the fact that when he turned to face the now standing Kimimaro, bones resembling daggers were growing out of his wrists. "Normally when I tell people that, their first reaction is that bones are lame," Kimimaro said, his face still displaying a laugh. "Now, I just blow stuff up with my finger bones instead, and then explain." After swallowing, Naruto said, That's cool. I know we just trained," he began, "but I didn't get to use my bones at all." But Kimimaro wasn't done. "We mostly only practiced taijutsu. Let's fight. I want to show you some of my amazing abilities, but I swear I won't blow you away." A few days later it was a significant day. He had no idea why, but he was certain that today would be important. Kakashi-sensei was back on his feet, almost at his normal strength, and they were all going to start the bridge construction process again today. Tazuna's team had reassembled all the materials early in the morning, and by noon, it was planned that Tazuna would once again be in charge of the operation, with Team 7 serving as patrol. Seeing the bridge, which was so near completion, being worked on again would cheer up the villagers, and Team 7 could finally see an end to this long and tiring mission. Nobody had worked on the bridge in weeks, since Tazuna and his crew had been attacked by mercenaries the last time, which is of course why Tazuna ventured to Konoha for ninja assistance. Naruto, who was now taking a lunch break and strolling through the woods, paused to sigh as he considered the time spent on this mission. He had expected it to be full of bonding developments. He was already close with Sasuke and Hinata, but not so much with their current sensei. However, being attacked by assassins and Zabuza had left them on edge, and left Kakashi injured for a while. This was no longer a feel-good, bonding-type mission. No one wanted anything more than to be able to return to Konoha alive. Perhaps they could bond then, discussing it safely over a cup of hot ramen. The bridge builder said that it wouldn't be long before they finished, and then Team 7 would return to Konoha and participate in the Chunin exams. They had discussed it with Kakashi, and Kakashi thought they were all prepared to take the test. Naturally, Naruto would have enjoyed his time with his team and put aside all difficulties and drama to spend one final moment with them if he had known that this would be his final mission for Konoha. However, fate decided to relax at this time. Naruto was close enough to the bridge to know that his team would not be able to assist him if he spotted an enemy ninja. As was his custom under Madara, Naruto had his Sharingan activated. For the innumerable times that it did so, it prevented him from dying instantly when a barrage of needles swung into the area where he was only standing. Shink. He dared to glance back to see that the needles had pierced the tree behind him, leaving thin holes in its trunk, and when his eyes jerked forward, he was shocked to see who had attacked him. The masked ninja from earlier. Zabuza's partner, the one who had defeated Kakashi. If this ninja was attacking him, it must have meant that Zabuza was about to attack the bridge if he hadn't already. Remarkably, the life or death situation seemed to calm his nerves. Time seemed to slow in his favor as the enemy ninja's hand reached to his side to draw more needles. He knew what this meant. Either he would return to the bridge victorious and help his team fight Zabuza, or this ninja would return to attack his team. Inhale. Consider. Don't get too close. You will be able to observe the attacks from a distance because of your advantage over the Sharingan and Kawarimi. He was calmed even more by Madara's voice in his head. He could do this. He had killed before, and he could feel it in his bones now that he was prepared to kill once more. The real Naruto appeared above in a tree, far to the side, looking down at the now alarmed ninja. His instinct was clear. In less than a second, he drew a kunai from his pouch, attached an explosive node to it, and threw it down at the enemy. The ninja managed to deflect the kunai before it hit, but a moment later, it exploded. This time, when the needles flew towards him again, he wasted no time in dodging. When they riddled his body, his illusion burst into a cloud of smoke. Whack! Smoke filled the clearing where the attacker had been, and Naruto's breathing became labored, just as he was beginning to feel secure, before Madara's voice interrupted him again. Go! If your attack was unsuccessful, it simply made your location known. Leave these forests. He nodded, then leapt from the tree and started to make his way back toward the bridge through the woods, not having to kill the enemy if he didn't have to, and if he could return to the bridge and fight with his team behind him, then. Bam! When a boot struck the side of Naruto's face, sending him flying off to the side and hitting a tree. All the air inside him escaped, and before he could even consider standing, he tried desperately to fill his lungs with air. He looked up to see the ninja standing a distance away from him, and it seemed that the explosion had actually caused some damage, as half of the ninja's mask was blown off, exposing the lower part of the ninja's face. When his attacker carefully took off the mask and placed it inside another pouch, Naruto couldn't help but stare in amazement that it was a female ninja, no older than himself. Her voice echoed in the small clearing, "You won't get in the way of Zabuza-sama," and she started to approach him while holding up her right hand in the shape of a half-seal. Her hand started to glow a pale light blue, and in a flash of light, Naruto was suddenly confined to the ice-covered tree behind him. Ice? Was it some kind of combination, and since when was ice an element that a ninja could use? Why do you want to demolish the bridge? Can't you see that the bridge is the only hope for this village? Naruto screamed out in desperation, his eyes still glowing a deep crimson. Hundreds of people are being condemned by you. She stopped walking toward him and lowered her hand, which surprised him because he hadn't expected dialogue to stop the assassin. Naruto could tell she knew what she was doing, that she was going to kill an entire village, from the conflicted look in her eyes. Her statement, you don't understand what it's like to live without a purpose, left Naruto completely perplexed. Is destroying this village your life's work? No. She hurled more needles at him in a flash, all of them thudding around his head, almost missing. I am here to serve Zabuza-sama. Before he found me, cared for me, and trained me, I was nothing. I was not wanted. The village and my parents both attempted to kill me, but Zabuza didn't give a damn about who I was. Just when I thought I would be better off dead, he took me in and gave me a purpose. The Kawarimi was one of the most fundamental ninja techniques, but for some reason most ninja never learned how to use it without hand seals. So Naruto's attacker assumed that just because his body was confined in ice, he couldn't escape. Naruto's eyes darted around the forest clearing, trying to connect with something he could substitute with. The assassin went on, "We're so close," adding that if they succeeded in this mission, they would have enough money to flee this ninja world. "We'll be capable of." In an instant, Naruto was on a tree behind his adversary, having replaced it with a leaf. He wasted no time in assembling multiple seals, slapping his hands together, taking a deep breath, and then yelling inwardly. Air bullet. Wind release. His compressed ball of air was strong enough that if it connected, he was certain she would be incapacitated, if not dead, and a ball taller than himself instantly blasted out from in front of him, hurtling toward the startled ninja. Ice wall. Ice release. He knew that she had blocked his attack, so he was forming more seals as he jumped down to the ground, preparing a follow-up attack. The clearing flashed a cold blue milliseconds before his air bullet connected, and Naruto had to quickly cover his eyes and force chakra into his legs as the clearing in front of him exploded in air, bending the trees all around him as air rushed through the forest. Though some of it had been broken by the impact, he paused to admire the enormous wall of crystallized ice that had grown up from the ground. He ran around it, saw his opponent, and as soon as he had a clear shot, he thrust his right hand forward, yelling. Wind tunnel. Wind release. A thin sheet of ice appeared directly in front of her, protecting her from his wind, and he gritted his teeth and forced more chakra into his attack, increasing the size of his wind tunnel and its ferocity, hoping to break down the cold barrier. A small cylindrical vortex the size of his hand spiraled out toward her, with enough force and speed that even if she tried to dodge it, she would be hit. But, as before, she flew through her own hand seals, and even with his Sharingan activated, he couldn't recognize the one she landed on. Sensing someone behind him, he halted his attack and turned around just in time to see an identical ice mirror appear directly behind him, with the girl somehow phasing out of it, holding another needle, slashing at him, but he leaned back and jumped to the side, realizing once more that he had almost been killed. In an instant, she formed several one-handed seals, and as his feet touched the ground again, several spears of ice formed in the air and flew toward him. Reaching within himself for as much wind chakra as he could manage, he threw his hand to the side, creating a messy gust of wind strong enough to reroute the spears and send them flying off in different directions, without wasting any time on hand seals. He couldn't help but smile in this situation, remembering all the times he had trained with Shisui, just for moments like this one. He was ready, and he hadn't even used his other signature jutsu yet. Even as his opponent flew through her own half-seal, he raised his hand and formed his own, and in a glimmer of wind, a perfect image of himself materialized above, swinging his leg at her face. Bam! His smile widened as the blow connected and the clone dispersed, sending her flying off to the side, but she was able to flip mid-air and stay upright. The Kage's Bunshin Jutsu allowed him to create hundreds of solid clones of himself almost anywhere he could see, so she wouldn't even know what hit her. This time, she was able to duck in time, but when another clone appeared right in front of her, she was unable to avoid getting punched in the face and was knocked flat on her back. Naruto held his hand up as before, and another clone appeared above her, already spinning in the air with the momentum of his kick. Not to be deterred, Naruto flew through a familiar set of hand seals and landed on the Fire Jutsu seal, also known as the Tiger Seal, as soon as his clones dispersed. Grand Fireball Jutsu. Fire release. From his mouth, a fireball as large as his wind bullet shot through his hands and toward the spot where she had fallen, but before it could hit her, enormous pillars of ice started to rise from the ground in front of it, and it exploded before it could get to her. Whack! His Sharingan eyes darted to where she might be, and when he saw her running toward him, he started to fly through his hand seals. The pillars kept growing out of the ground toward him, but he was fast enough to jump to the side before they could reach him. He cursed and attempted to pull his arms apart to break the ice, but it kept encasing him until his entire upper body was covered in crystal ice, and to his surprise, ice started to grow on his hands and arms, effectively stopping his attack. He was already preparing a Kawarimi, and he was about to perform it when Madara interrupted him, his legs giving way under the weight of his upper half. You can't use ninjutsu to defeat her. Both your fire and wind techniques can be rendered useless by ice, which is a mixture of wind and water. Instill false confidence in her by drawing her close to you. You are Uchiha, remember. Knowing what that meant, Naruto nodded. Shisui's eyes held his greatest strength and capability. What's your name? I've never fought someone like you before, he said, calling out to the girl, who was coming toward him steadily this time but holding a needle. He smiled amiably at her. She was within range and stopped when she was a few steps ahead of him. Haku. Naruto nodded and lowered his head, saying, Haku. Haku. I enjoy that. Unbelievably, this brief interaction has taught me something. You said it's pointless to live without a purpose, and I couldn't agree more. Like you, no one wanted me before I was adopted by the Uchiha. I was left an orphan. The Uchiha were the family I never had, and they meant the world to me. I loved that person like a brother, but they were taken away from me. I do have a purpose, just like you. It drives me forward each day. I need to grow stronger so that I can be a force of justice in this ninja world. I need to bring those who were responsible for killing my family to justice, and stop something like that from ever happening again. Haku screamed as chains jerked out of the ground and ensnared her, bringing her to her knees. When she was looking directly into Naruto's crimson eyes, which were penetrating her soul, he grinned. The ice surrounding him cracked until it shattered, and his chains grew tighter. He rubbed some of the frozen rubble from his shoulders and got to his feet. How? She cried, frantically attempting to escape the restraints. Your hands were covered in ice. He indicated his temple with a finger. As he said, you've obviously never fought a Uchiha before, he was proud. Otherwise, you never would have made eye contact with me. Experience firsthand the world's greatest genjutsu Kekkei Genkai, the Sharingan. Haku had actually collapsed to her knees, but she was unbound by any chains. He had caught her in his technique as soon as she had approached him. Naruto stood up, rubbing sensation back into his hands as the ice surrounding them melted into nothingness. He turned to face his captured adversary directly. His breathing was labored, but his hand was steady as he slowly withdrew a kunai. She could simply wake up, go back to the bridge, and kill him or one of his teammates if he knocked her unconscious. This was not a friendly sparring match where the winner was obvious and the fight was over. He had to make sure his team was safe in this actual battle. He was prepared to kill again because he had already killed once. Bam! Naruto was thrown sideways by an invisible force and rolled around on the ground until he painfully stopped a distance away. Haku, you fool, we don't have time to be playing around here. Kisame is trying to hold off the other Akatsuki member, and we need to kill Tazuna and get out of here as quickly as we can. Naruto attempted to raise his head to see who was approaching, but his vision started to haze. He swore. He wasn't attacked by Zabuza. Who was it? What was the expected number of attackers for the bridge? What prevented Kimimaro from being with his team? His head fell, and he was unconscious on the ground before he could hear anything more. Bridge. With a worried expression on his face, Sasuke peered off the side of the bridge and into the dark mist. Naruto had not returned from his lunch break more than an hour earlier. Sasuke knew that he shouldn't be concerned about anything because Kimimaro had offered to go look for him some time ago, but still. There was nothing natural about the mist. It appeared to be floating in their direction, ready to devour the bridge. Unaware of the approaching cloud, he glanced quickly around him, taking in Tazuna and all of the workers. Kakashi and Hinata were also somewhere on the bridge. Kuso. They must have a meeting before. The mist struck the section of the bridge that was still under construction. Sasuke's Sharingan was activated in an instant, and the shroud of mist was booming with chakra, confirming his fears. A shadowy figure was at the front of the cloud, approaching them slowly. Momochi Zabuza. It was almost time for their second fight. Somewhere behind him, Kakashi gave the clear order, Hinata, Sasuke, protect the bridge builder. Sasuke wasted no time in looking around for the older man's location and attempting to recognize the face as the other employees started to flee in terror. Amid the chaos and panic, he managed to catch Tazuna's face and ran to him, summoning chakra from within as a safety measure. He arrived at Tazuna at about the same moment as Hinata, and they nodded silently, separating him from the approaching fog. Their sensei acted quickly. Sasuke instantly recognized the hand seals he was flying through and leapt in front of the group, yelling. Fire release. Grand Fireball Jutsu. From Kakashi's mouth, a ball of fire shot toward the creeping mist, larger than Sasuke had seen since the Uchiha clan. It was instantly engulfed, and the strong, luminous flames kept burning, clearing the end of the bridge and removing most of the mist. It kept going forward without exploding until the flames were out of sight. Unbelievably unharmed, Zabuza was now visible in the clearing at the end of the bridge. He threw his hand forward as he walked forward with his sword over his back, instantly sending the mist behind and surrounding him, hurtling forward and engulfing the entire bridge. As the mist rushed through them at amazing speeds, Sasuke covered his face with his arm and pushed chakra into his feet. He was shocked to see that, as before, he could only see his own hands when he lowered his arm. Once again, they were blind, and his heart started to tremble with a familiar fear. Tizuna will die today. Their assailant's ominous voice echoed through the fog. And anyone standing in my way will die as well. Steel clashes started to reverberate instantly in front of them. Zabuza and Kakashi had already started fighting once more. Even though Sasuke trusted his sensei, he was aware that Zabuza had the upper hand in the absence of visibility. The mist had to be cleared. Naruto was where? Unconscious in the familiar yet unsettling setting of the sewers of his subconscious, Naruto sat on the ground. His eyes stayed down, staring at his own hands. Even as footsteps started to fill the room and reverberate around him, he felt helpless. You are weak, the menacingly low voice above him affirmed. You have one of the most powerful set of eyes in the entire ninja world, and yet a mere child can defeat you. How can you protect the world from the injustice of the ninja system when you can't even protect your team? In an attempt to come up with a defense or something to say, Naruto stood there looking defiantly into Madara's eyes, but he was at a loss. His shoulders dropped, and he sighed in pain, his eyes unable to meet Madara's. Madara was correct. He couldn't stop Haku from going to the bridge and had let his team down. He believed he was much stronger now, but he still couldn't do something as basic as keeping his team safe. He wasn't finished yet, though. There was still time, and he had not been killed. He was aware of his obligations. Madara, lend me your power. With a look of amusement on his face, Madara looked down at Naruto and raised an eyebrow. Not even a question? You think you can suddenly demand to use my power whenever you choose? Naruto's tone remained resolute. No, but lend it to me anyways. I'm not as strong as I need to be to change the world, or even protect my team. I still need you, please. I don't want my team to die. I can't lose them. I can't lose anyone else. Madara crossed his arms and gave a small laugh. A chakra that resembled a dark, black flame started to envelop Naruto. Very well. Allow me to give you a taste of what true power is like. Bridge. A masked figure appeared in front of Sasuke as the fog sufficiently cleared. At least the mist had dispersed around him, Hinata, and the bridge builder, but he was still unable to see Kakashi and Zabuza fighting farther down on the bridge. It was the same masked ninja who had previously removed Zabuza. She was Zabuza's partner, and he knew it from the beginning. Her mask, however, was broken. Given that her face was exposed from the nose down and that he could see blood on it with his sharp eyes, it appeared to have been broken. Consequently, Naruto. He wasted no time. He held a single seal to his mouth while his crimson eyes narrowed at his opponent. He could feel the chakra energy circling inside of him, pleading for release. Fire release. Grand Fireball Jutsu. From his mouth, a huge ball of fire shot out in the direction of the enemy ninja. She was momentarily out of his line of sight, but before the fireball could get to her, he noticed water rising from the bridge's side. The water hit the ball of fire and put it out with a hissing explosion. Before he could come up with another attack, his eyes widened, and he leapt to the side, narrowly avoiding multiple spears of ice that flew into the ground where he had just been standing. This girl was the real deal if she could defeat Naruto. From the beginning, he had to give it his all. He launched himself toward the assailant using chakra as soon as he touched down. He would probably have the upper hand in taijutsu with his Sharingan, and she wouldn't have time or space to employ the odd ice jutsu anymore. His gaze found her hands forming hand seals at a dizzying rate before he could get to her, finally settling on one he had never seen before. Ice started to shoot out of the bridge in lethal spikes as she threw her hands to the ground. He dodged them by leaping high into the air with chakra, creating his own hand seals in the process. He spit out a few smaller fireballs down toward her, bringing the seal to his mouth again. As before, the fireballs exploded harmlessly before they could reach her, and water seemed to turn into ice out of thin air. Suddenly, before he could land, his enemy was in the air, in front of him. She impaled him with what looked like a sharp needle after his head jerked sideways for a brief moment. She slashed at him from the side, but he was able to block her arm with his forearm before the second blow could land because of his eyes. He used his other hand to draw out a kunai and cut at her face in an attempt to get the upper hand. She was able to block him with her forearm, though, just like him. Sasuke jerked his upper body backwards while both of their arms were engaged, suspended in midair for no more than a second. He then used the momentum to bring his knee down on her exposed shin. She flew backwards with a noticeable thud and scattered into the water. As he hit the ground again, Sasuke swore. He saw Hinata fending off what must have been the actual assailant as he turned in midair. He rushed forward to join her as soon as he landed, but the girl flicked her wrist at him, sending multiple needles at him that he was able to knock away with his kunai before he could even get there. He then hurled his own kunai in her direction. She flicked her wrist toward his kunai, still avoiding Hinata's jabs, and this time it froze in midair before breaking into 1,000 ice shards. When Sasuke arrived at Hinata's side, the girl had moved away from him. He saw that Hinata had succeeded in removing the remaining enemy's mask, revealing a girl of their age with a dejected expression on her face. She yelled at them, "My name is Haku. Your friend was strong, but just like him, I will defeat you as well for the sake of my master." The temperature of the air surrounding Sasuke and Hinata started to rapidly decrease almost immediately. Sasuke looked at Hinata for a moment to make sure she was okay, but he was taken aback by the shocked expression on her face. He briefly considered whether the attacker's name mattered to her, but he quickly dismissed the idea when a sphere of ice started to form around them. Sasuke briefly believed that they would be imprisoned inside an ice dome, but the ice walls never joined and continued to float around them independently. He glanced quickly back at Haku through one of the openings and saw her holding up a strange hand seal, and the ice walls turned into glistening mirrors with a chakra burst. 10 or more flawless reflections of Hinata and himself were visible to Sasuke. A voice abruptly emerged from behind them, saying, "No one has ever escaped this jutsu of mine." All of his reflections vanished almost instantly, and he was shocked to see Haku's reflection in the mirror after she had inexplicably adorned her mask again. Sasuke wasted little more time. He held his hand to his mouth and pushed out converted chakra, creating a ball of fire that sped toward Haku without the need for several hand seals. He was surprised that his fireball did not harm the mirror or the Haku within. He was rewarded instead with a barrage of needles, which he managed to knock aside with a swiftly drawn kunai. Haku declared, "Your fire won't work on these mirrors, it's hopeless. If you stand still, I'll be able to accurately throw my needles and end your lives as quickly and painlessly as possible." In a flash, Sasuke was standing back to back with Hinata, who had also drawn her kunai. When he realized that his Sharingan was activated, he cursed. If they stood this way, at least they could deflect any needles while they considered an escape route. As fast as Haku was, Hinata was at a tremendous disadvantage, even though he might be able to see the needles approaching at a slower and much more predictable pace. She was going to get hit if they remained motionless for very long. He whispered back to her, "Hinata," while maintaining a straight head and eyes on Haku, who was now hopping quickly between the mirrors. "We have to make a run for it. She won't be able to stop us both. On the count of 3. Sasuke's eyes were there, and he swiftly knocked away the needles that were flying at them from above. 1, 2, now. In a flash, the two of them were apart, running for the closest gaps between the mirrors. He briefly wished Naruto had been with them as he was running. Here, the Kage Bunshin would be extremely helpful, and Naruto could easily make his getaway with a Kawarimi. A scream came from behind him as he was about to reach the edge, causing him to halt and turn around. Hinata fell to the ground, needles sticking out of her legs. Sasuke would have suffered the same fate if it weren't for his Sharingan, but he was able to dodge the side strike that was aimed at him. A boot from behind made a painful contact with his back and sent him hurtling to the center before he could even scream out to Hinata. He quickly got back up on his feet after landing on his side and put his hand sealed to his mouth. He threw a few tiny fireballs in Hinata's direction. With a needle in hand, Haku leapt from one of the mirrors near her and ran toward his fallen comrade, but before she could get to him, his jutsu made her leap sideways and back into another mirror. Evidently in pain, Hinata stumbled to her feet and made her way to where he was. Sasuke could not speak. Of course, that was a dumb question, but he wanted to ask her if she was okay. Rather, he tried to inhale deeply and calmly while gritting his teeth. Now he could not afford to make a mistake. Haku had just come out of the mirror and was running toward them when his eyes darted to the side. He leapt toward her and used his kunai to cut her, but she deflected it with a needle of her own. Before he could launch a counterattack, she leapt back into the ice mirror and vanished from view. His gaze swept across the dome of mirrors, searching for her next appearance. He managed to dodge the barrage of needles aimed at him from his sides when his eyes caught sight of her. Haku was already out of the mirror and running toward Hinata, who was facing the other way, when he looked up again. He made no hesitation. He tried to intercept Haku by flying forward while pumping chakra into his legs. Sasuke was able to ram his shoulder into Hinata just before she got to her, who was slowly turning around. She spun around and slashed a needle through his arm before he made contact, but his momentum propelled him ahead, knocking her back and into another mirror. He gripped his arm as he hit the floor, fighting back the startling pain as blood started to trickle through his fingers. He turned to face Hinata, who was now staring at him with her own eyes full of shock and pain. He made an effort to smile convincingly, as though he was certain that they would somehow survive this ordeal and that it wouldn't be their last. However, fear throbbed through his body as he turned back to face Haku. He didn't know. It looked like they would be lucky to escape unscathed. This opponent simply had too much speed. One mistake, and Sasuke's mind exploded with pain, and as he slowly dropped to his knees, his vision became blurry. He looked down at his stomach, from which a spear of ice had now emerged from the earth. His Sharingan activated as he attempted to keep his eyes open, but it appeared that all of his chakra had slipped out of him. The hard ground beneath him, which oddly felt so soft and reassuring, was where he fell to his side. He let out a slow exhale as everything around him darkened and became quiet. A Hinata when Sasuke struck the ground, her eyes widened in terror. There's no way this could be happening. Blood slowly started to collect around her fallen comrade as the tiny spear of ice that had penetrated Sasuke instantly melted into water. Even though it was an unsettling sight, Hinata felt a tiny bit of relief. His heart was still beating and he wasn't dead if the blood was dripping out that fast. She knew that she should disregard him and keep fighting Haku because they had been repeatedly instructed in the Academy's ninja training classes that you must carry out the mission even if a comrade dies in combat. It would be suicide to stop and attempt to assist each comrade. She knew exactly why it was true that she had aced that class. However, this was real life, not a test. Even though she was going to die as a result of this error, she didn't care. She rushed over to his side and tore off the area of his garments that surrounded the wound. Before her hands instantly started to glow with her chakra, she swiftly located the spot and held them just over it. Although she wasn't even close to being a medical ninja, she knew she could prolong Sasuke's life if she could stop the bleeding because all Academy ninja were trained to seal off wounds. Before she felt she had done the best she could, a minute had passed. Sasuke was still unconscious, but his breathing was steady and the bleeding had stopped. She should have been dead by now, but it took her a moment to realize that. When she looked up, she noticed that Haku had emerged from a mirror and was standing a few paces ahead of her, but she had been so preoccupied with him. She focused on her opponent with narrowed eyes. Haku said, "You're prolonging the inevitable, at last." She was wearing a broken mask that obscured her face. "After I kill you, Sasuke will die as well." Hinata was aware of the truth. She was not as strong as Sasuke or Naruto, who had both been defeated by this ice ninja. Furthermore, she was unable to match Haku's taijutsu skills, which were her strongest suit. Haku. That name was still fresh in her mind. Naruto would bring up Haku's name in her dreams, and he informed her that Haku had been correct about something pertaining to life's purpose. She had initially been afraid of another element that validated the visions she was having, but she gradually came to the realization that, if they were all going to perish on this bridge, then none of those visions mattered. "You can save him though," Haku said abruptly. "My mission isn't to kill you and your friend. Step aside and let me kill the bridge builder and Zabuza and I will leave. Naruto is still alive. I left him unconscious in the woods. None of your friends will have to die today if you stand down now." Her eyes grew wide once more. There was a possibility. Her friends could survive if Tazuna died. She might survive. However, did she want this future? Did she have to give up the mission and all the villagers who depended on the bridge being completed? No. No matter what she desired, she was no longer a child. She was a kunoichi of Konoha, a ninja. She was a senju, too. She would die in combat if she were to pass away today, and it would be a dignified one. She grabbed the kunai Sasuke had dropped from the floor and threw it as fast as she could at Haku. Haku was able to quickly move her head, but the kunai only just touched the area of her lower cheek that the broken mask did not cover, leaving a thin line of blood visible. Haku murmured darkly, "So be it," and gradually merged back into the mirror behind her. With the rush of adrenaline coursing through her body, Hinata hurried to her feet, forgetting the pain in her legs from earlier. She tried to follow Haku, who appeared to be teleporting from mirror to mirror, as her eyes darted back and forth. Knowing that her reflexes would need to be flawless, she prepared herself for the impending needles by drawing her own kunai. Swoosh! Needles were already flying in her direction when her gaze swung to her right. The needles barely touched her cheek as she leaned away, just as Haku had done. But before she could get her stance back in full, she threw up her arm in time to block the needle Haku was holding, which had come flying at her from an entirely different direction. However, Haku had already jumped back into a mirror, repeating the action, before she could fully turn to face her opponent. She hoped her vision would be as sharp as Sasuke's. She had previously only seen Sasuke and Haku as a blur, but even then, Sasuke had taken her by surprise. How was she going to stay ahead of this ninja? How could she have known where Haku would next emerge? Hinata briefly closed her eyes in an attempt to concentrate. Doing everything she could to help speed up her own vision, she pushed chakra into her eyes. She couldn't spend too much time circling around in an attempt to find Haku or follow her. She had to see. She had to see. She had a fresh perspective on the world when she opened her eyes. Instead of ice, the mirrors in front of her started to sparkle with chakra, and for some reason, her peripheral vision started to get sharper until all of a sudden, she felt as though she could see as far ahead as she could see to her sides. As more and more mirrors started to appear in her field of vision, her peripheral vision continued to grow and sharpen, pushing the limits of what she had previously experienced. She stopped wasting energy trying to follow Haku and put her feet firmly on the ground while maintaining eye contact. She immediately lowered herself to a crouch, letting the needles fly harmlessly over her head from behind. Knowing exactly where they were coming from, she was able to use her kunai to swat the needles away when she saw Haku appear to her right and start throwing them again. In an instant, Haku was on the other side of the dome, but when she charged at her, Hinata saw everything and kicked out to her side without even turning, hitting Haku's chest and sending her tumbling back against the ground. She understood everything. "I can see you now, wherever you go," Hinata yelled in defiance as she once more assumed her fighting stance. "You can't sneak up on me anymore." Even though she was still wearing the mask, Hinata could see fear written on her face and in her eyes as her enemy swiftly got back up on her feet. Haku said, "I didn't know I was fighting a Hyuga," her voice less assured than before. "Fine, you may be able to see me, but that doesn't mean you can keep up with me." Bridge as Sasuke gradually regained consciousness. A terrible pain emanating from his stomach area accompanied the light that was beginning to flood his mind. He knew he had been stabbed when he looked down at his wound. What had taken place? What kept him alive? He didn't realize that he was still in the midst of a battle until sound rushed back. He saw Hinata standing bravely above him with a kunai in one hand when he looked up. In the absence of his Sharingan, her movements appeared to be a blur. As if she knew where they were going the moment they were thrown, she was able to avoid or block every needle that flew at her from every angle he could think of. There was not a single wasted movement. His eyes widened in shock and recognition when she turned enough for him to see her face. Her pearl-like eyes were reached by veins that jutted out from her temples. How could the Byakugan have happened? Hinata, what had happened? Hinata was able to evade or block the majority of Haku's attacks when he came out of a mirror to battle her. Even though she had perfect vision, he could tell she was struggling to keep up with Haku because he saw multiple cuts on her arms and clothes. He had to assist her. Perhaps if they battled together, they could defeat her in. All of Sasuke's thoughts abruptly stopped when he was struck by a wave of chakra that was both powerful and malevolent. Hinata paused exchanging blows for a moment, as if sensing it as well, and glanced to the side, probably to see where it was coming from. Haku kicked her in the face so forcefully that she fell to the ground, unconscious, before she could turn back her focus. Sasuke swore at this awful misfortune. They appeared to have the advantage for a brief moment. However, Hinata would not be able to defeat Haku if he was incapable of fighting. Sasuke made an unsuccessful attempt to get to his feet as Haku charged toward Hinata to kill her. That was it. He was unable to assist her and would not be able to arrive in time even if he could. He could only look on in horror as Haku got closer to the fallen Hinata and whack! Before Haku could reach Hinata, she was knocked back a few milliseconds, and she skidded on the ground before painfully hitting one of her own mirrors. When Sasuke looked up to see what had happened, he had to blink quickly to clear his eyes of dust. He was both relieved and surprised to see Naruto standing in front of Hinata with his arms still raised in the air. With tears of joy starting to well up in his eyes, he exclaimed, "Naruto!" To his friend. He had assumed Hinata was gone for good because he had been so close to losing her. "Watch out for the mirrors. She can teleport from one to another, but she can't attack you directly unless she..." When he realized Naruto wasn't even listening to him, he interrupted himself in the middle of his statement. Rather, he had briefly knelt beside Hinata with his back to Sasuke. When he got to his feet, Sasuke noticed a look of pure and intense hatred on Naruto's face, and he instinctively pushed back to put some distance between them. His eyes, those weren't the eyes of a typical Sharingan. With a needle in her hand, Haku launched herself into an attack right away, moving so quickly that it appeared to Sasuke that she had teleported. Naruto did not recoil. Naruto was holding Haku's wrist, the needle inches from his own face, when Sasuke opened his eyes after blinking. "I hesitated killing you before," Naruto said, his voice laced with power and chakra, but somehow lower and darker than usual. "But not again." The mirrors around them quickly caught fire with black flame and started to melt away, causing Sasuke's eyes to widen. Even though she was just as shocked as he was, Haku started to make seals with her free hand while Naruto continued to hold her other wrist. Above Naruto, water started to form in the air and turn into ice needles, which then swiftly descended in his direction and impaled him. But before they could get to him, Naruto suddenly disappeared and appeared on the ground a considerable distance away. Fujin. The air around Naruto briefly shimmered as the chakra in his eyes pulsed, and then a faint pulse was sent toward Haku. The invisible attack was already in place when Sasuke's head managed to turn and face their adversary. As Haku collapsed to her knees, screaming, his eyes widened in horror. Her right arm was severed from her shoulder and flew to the side, causing blood to spurt into the air. With his body still encased in a dark, sinister chakra, Naruto started to approach her slowly. Haku was still on her knees, her left hand covered in chakra, pressing against the bleeding wound, trying quickly to seal it off after ceasing to scream. The bleeding appeared to have stopped by the time Naruto was standing in front of her, but Sasuke became acutely aware that he was no longer certain who he was standing for. He shouted to his friend, "Naruto, stop it," and was startled by the fear in his own voice. "You've beaten her, it's over." After his cries were ignored, Naruto's right hand slowly extended toward Haku's face. He removed the shattered mask she was wearing and tossed it aside before gradually raising her chin until she was looking directly into his eyes. "Raijin." Whack. A huge gust of wind blew through and interrupted him before he could finish his sentence because another big explosion occurred somewhere else on the bridge. Although Haku fell to the side, Naruto appeared to have lost interest in her and started to leave them, moving toward the location of the explosion. The Kakashi. Kakashi was already aware that not only was his life in jeopardy, but also the lives of his team, Tazuna, and the mission's completion, when the mist started to cover the bridge. He wasn't totally sure that Kakashi could defeat the legendary ninja Zabuza Momochi again, even though he had defeated him once before. Even though he didn't fully trust him, Kakashi could use all the assistance he could get because not only was Naruto gone this time, but the strong and youthful ninja Kimimaro had also left to get him. Although Zabuza had a distinct advantage due to the mist, he and Zabuza were about as evenly matched as two could get. Kakashi didn't hesitate in the least to use his innate affinities to subdue his opponent. He could never get a clear hit, but every time he sensed Zabuza's position, streams of fire and bolts of lightning erupted from his hands. He would have to call his dogs and hope that if things kept going this way. He was surprised when the mist started to push off the bridge's sides and clear his vision. Before he could start worrying about why the mist had cleared, Kakashi glanced over to where his team was engaged in combat and noticed Zabuza standing a considerable distance away in front of him. Around Hinata, who was now dodging needles hurled at her from all sides, it appeared as though ice mirrors were floating in the air in a dome-like pattern. "Kuso, I need to finish this quickly before someone gets hurt." His eyes widened in horror as he looked back at Zabuza. Kisame and Mangetsu, two prominent members of the renowned swordsman team, were standing next to the mist assassin. Any chance Kakashi had of winning this battle swiftly had simply vanished. He was aware of his own strength and knew that if he engaged in combat with the three in front of him, he would soon be killed. What had become of Naruto and Kimimaro? Zabuza yelled at him, "Stand down, Kakashi," while holding his sword horizontally to the ground with one hand as though it were weightless. "Step aside and Tazuna will be the only one who has to die here. I don't care about fighting you, even though I'd love to kill you after you bested me last time. We don't have time, tell me. Tazuna will die either way, but do you want your team to die with him?" Kakashi hesitated for a moment at this. The Zabuza he had heard so much about, the fabled demon of the mist, was not like this at all. Zabuza was more inclined to hope Kakashi refused so they could still fight. However, Zabuza's expression now seemed to be one of true desperation, as though his only goal in life was to leave this place as soon as possible. What was happening? Zabuza went on, "What are you worried about? The village? After I take Gado's money, I'll kill him on the spot and the village will be free. Someone else will step up and build this bridge either way. Kakashi, stand down now, please." Before he could say anything more, Kakashi was forced to turn around after feeling an odd wave of dark power pulse out from behind him. It was Naruto, and it came from inside the ice dome. Kisame concluded, "He's taken too long," which made Kakashi snap his head back at his opponent. We have to kill him, before they get here. Kakashi had no idea how to get ready for what was about to happen. Water started to pour out of Kisami's mouth in amazing quantities without even the need for hand seals, growing and creating a tidal wave in front of him in a matter of seconds. As the water wall grew, it rose higher and higher until it was above Kakashi. This jutsu was inevitable, and he couldn't think of a method for parrying so much water. The water all descended to where he stood in a matter of seconds, forming a gigantic water missile that Kakashi had never seen before. A swirl of red and black was the last thing he saw before the water touched him. Whack! Everything around Kakashi collapsed as a result of the water literally pushing through the bridge and causing a huge explosion of sound and stone due to its weight and speed. Ironically, Kakashi appeared to be standing in the only spot where the water didn't reach. He was on his knees, but when he finally looked up to see how he was still alive, his eyes widened in shock to see a man in robes standing in front of him, his arms outstretched, obviously shielding them from the water. The robe's pattern, black fabric with red clouds on it, was instantly recognizable. This man, whoever he was a member of Akatsuki. Kakashi had gotten up by the time the water stopped. He was shocked to see that part of the bridge between them had been destroyed by Kisami's attack, leaving a sizable opening. His robe fluttered in the wind as the Akatsuki ninja who had rescued him lowered his arms. He had dark skin, his long black hair was pulled back into a ponytail and braided, and he wore dark sunglasses to protect his eyes. The man said, "I am here to kill Zabuza," in a low, calm voice. "Thank you for delaying his actions as long as you did. He's been a real pain in the ass to track down. That being said, I won't need any further assistance from you." The air around him seemed to crack and sparkle as soon as he was done talking. As though the pressure of the world had suddenly increased, Kakashi gasped and found it difficult to breathe. The chakra of this man, whoever he was strong enough to make even a Jonin like him take a cautious step back. Kakashi's hair started to stand on end as electricity suddenly started to form around the man, sparking and then vanishing. HN. The Akatsuki ninja merely grunted and tossed his right arm aside, holding it with 2 fingers protruding. Kakashi was forced to blink as a pure wave of energy surged out around him. When he opened his eyes, the surroundings had dramatically brightened. His Sharingan needed to concentrate, and when it did, he noticed a single lightning bolt extending from in front of the man and striking Mangetsu's chest, who was standing across the gap beside Zabuza. Then there was the sound. All the excess energy that hadn't been converted to light seemed to roar with thunder, and then the lightning struck and the area exploded. When Kakashi turned to face his former opponents, he saw that Mangetsu was standing there, trembling wildly, while Zabuza and Kisame had only been knocked to the side. For a brief moment, it appeared as though Mangetsu had just absorbed the crazily potent attack, but his skin quickly turned pale and he transformed into an odd liquid that sparkled with electricity before dissolving into nothingness. By the time Kisame and Zabuza were able to get to their feet, the Akatsuki had somehow crossed the gap and was approaching them. The first to hit was Kisame, who screamed as a stream of water shot out of his mouth and headed straight for the Akatsuki. With a wave of his hand, the water simply flowed around him and fell harmlessly over the bridge's side without ever making contact. Kisame raised his sword and was about to strike him when the ninja turned his head and Kisame found himself frozen in place. Kakashi witnessed Kisame being flung and sustained in midair by an unseen force with his unaided eye. However, Kakashi saw the truth with his Sharingan eye. Kisame was covered in chakra as a long tentacle, no, an arm of chakra, came out of the Akatsuki's back and entered Kisami's chest. Lightning release. Electric funeral. Before Zabuza could intervene, electricity erupted from the Akatsuki's hands, instantly striking Kisame as the arm of chakra extended, pushing him out into the air and over the water. Kisame screamed in excruciating pain for a few seconds as electricity continued to flow out of the Akatsuki's fingers, but the attack didn't seem nearly as strong or immediate as the one that had hit Mangetsu. After what seemed like an eternity, Kisame fell silently into the sea below, and Kakashi watched as the arm of chakra vanished along with the electricity. Nobody stood between Zabuza and the man in the robes now. Kakashi pondered briefly whether he ought to step in. Even though he had been fighting to kill, it would be better to simply detain Zabuza and place him under Kurigakure authority if the result was clear. However, Kakashi was smart enough to avoid getting in the way of the robed ninja and his target, and that hope was only temporary at best. Even though Zabuza was his opponent, Kakashi couldn't help but feel sorry for the man, who undoubtedly knew he was nearing the end of his life. The man's serene voice, Zabuza Momochi, was audible over the chasm. "You have continuously defied the will of Akatsuki, as well as the ninja world. You are nothing more than a criminal, and you denied Akatsuki's chance of redemption. For this, you will pay the ultimate price. Zabuza dropped to his knees as the man drew a katana from his side. When Kakashi's Sharingan focused, he noticed that multiple invisible arms of chakra were emerging from the robed man once more, holding and pushing Zabuza down. Kakashi appeared surprised by Zabuza's submissiveness. The man did not permit any expressions of regret, nor did he anticipate that Zabuza would beg for his life. Rather, he used one hand to back his katana, aiming the tip at Zabuza's chest, and without thinking, he No. With a needle in one hand, Zabuza's apprentice charged at the robed man from the side, but Kakashi had no idea where she was from. He saw right away that she actually only had one arm because there was a bloody mess where her arm should have been and part of her tunic appeared to have been cut through. It was a pointless attack. When the Akatsuki ninja extended his left hand toward her, she froze in place, gripped by an unseen force, before she could get close. When Kakashi realized what had happened, his eyes widened. This was a new method. In contrast to Zabuza, who had arms of chakra growing out of his spine, Haku was held within an invisible sphere of chakra that he had created. No arms were visible this time. Furthermore, it appeared as though the arms securing Zabuza from his back vanished. Although this was a minor detail, Kakashi couldn't help but sigh whenever the man appeared to show any signs of weakness. He was unable to focus on both because his arms of chakra vanished while he was using his hands to focus his force-type chakra. Zabuza sensed this instantly and got to his feet, aiming his sword at Raizo. He roared, "Let her go!" With a fierce intensity that made his eyes burn. He reached up to his face with his free hand and tore off the bandages, showing his face for the first time. She doesn't have to die. Overhanging the bridge was silence. Zabuza stood in front of them both, his sword pointing forward, while Haku hovered above the ground, suspended by the Akatsuki's technique. Zabuza let his long sword fall to the ground and clang noisily, breaking the brief silence. He spat out, "Your mission is to kill me, isn't it?" Although it was difficult to tell from this distance, Zabuza gave Kakashi a truly frightful appearance, as if all of his teeth were sharpened to a point. "Haku, you have to run away. You can live. You can still live a normal life." Unexpectedly, the Akatsuki ninja obeyed Zabuza's order and dropped Haku to the ground. But then he flicked his wrist, pushing her back with a wave of force and sending her skidding to the bridge's side. "You're right," the robed man said as he approached Zabuza once more. "The girl doesn't have to die. Farewell, Zabuza Momochi." For a few moments, the two seemed to converse, but Kakashi was too scared to approach them to listen. The Akatsuki had already drawn his katana back by the time Haku had gotten to her feet. It was too late for her to attempt to save him again. The man sliced audibly through Zabuza's chest, sending the blade through his flesh. Suddenly, it was finished. In an instant, Zabuza collapsed to the side, silent and lifeless. Amaterasu. Just when Kakashi thought it was over, Naruto, whose body was bursting with visible black and red chakra and burning like flame, vaulted across the gap, causing the Akatsuki's robe to burst into black flame. When he landed, he charged towards Haku, sprinting low to the ground. Kakashi knew he had to step in this time. He was unaware of Naruto's origins or his current condition, but he was aware of how dangerous things were getting. "Kuso!" he exclaimed as he pushed himself across the opening to catch up. "I'm not going to make it." The robed Akatsuki had materialized in front of her, shirtless but otherwise unharmed, before either Kakashi or Naruto could get to Haku. Naruto tried to strike him with what looked like a clawed hand, but it didn't work. The Akatsuki ducked and delivered a sweeping spin kick, knocking Naruto's feet from under him in a lightning-fast and fluid move. The man kept spinning in that same motion, and while Naruto was still in the air, he grabbed his face with one hand. Narashi Tukai. As though struck by a powerful wind gust, Naruto's hair blew back. Naruto skimmed off the ground as the Akatsuki, who was still holding his hand over his face, flicked his wrist forward. At this point, Kakashi managed to emerge from behind Naruto and capture him before he could collide with the bridge's side. Kakashi was shocked to see that the strong crimson and black chakra that had surrounded him had essentially vanished as he looked down at his pupil. He could see with his Sharingan that his balance had been thrown off. His chakra was dispersed all over his body, unable to properly flow to his brain. With a groan of agony, Naruto rolled out of Kakashi's embrace, heaved multiple times, and eventually fainted. The Akatsuki ninja had already begun to approach them with his katana drawn by the time Kakashi looked up. Raizo. The appearance of Kimimaro, who was carrying the now unconscious Haku on his shoulders, was greatly appreciated by Kakashi. "They're not our enemies," responded Kimimaro. "These were the guys who I stayed with after we separated." He turned to face his comrade, Raizo, as Kimimaro had called him. It was impossible for Kakashi not to recognize that name. He was distracted from his thoughts when he saw that Raizo's back had circular tattoos. With the exception of the single one beneath his neck, there were 7 in all, running down along his spine in pairs. Along with the 7th, each of the 3 pairs contained a different kanji inside the circles. Raizo turned around once more before he could read the words in the kanji. Raizo said to him, "Your student has quite the dangerous chakra," in his ever-calm voice. With a snap of his fingers, the same robe materialized in front of him. He snatched it up and smoothly swung it on. And he doesn't seem to be in control of it either. If you aren't careful, he might end up wearing the same robe as me one day. Hinata. Konoha. In the morning she was finally awakened by a cool morning breeze that blew her dark brown hair across her face as she gradually opened her eyes to the light. When her gaze finally settled on Naruto, who was lying in the bed in front of her with a contented expression on his face, she couldn't help but smile. Although she always liked his appearance, these past few weeks had been extremely stressful. She couldn't recall the last time he appeared so at ease. She got up and made her way to the window of the room, which she had neglected to shut the previous evening. Although the hospital had a rigorous visiting hour policy, there were occasions when an exception had to be made. Hinata was finally ejected from the hospital room in this instance, but not before sneaking in through the window she had purposefully left unlocked in case she wasn't allowed to stay. She was reminded of the long-gone times when she and Naruto used to sneak in and out of the orphanage where they had grown up together as it closed with a quiet thud. When she looked back at Naruto, she let out a sigh. Even after the medic ninja worked on him for a while, Naruto had not regained consciousness since their horrific battle in the Land of Waves. She had even heard a rumor while she was waiting in the hospital lobby that the Toad Sage, one of the fabled Sannin, had arrived to work on Naruto. Someone of that caliber. Only 3 individuals held the title of Sannin in Konoha's hierarchy, which placed them immediately beneath the Hokage in terms of power and authority. Sannin had not even been a rank until the most recent Great Ninja War, when the leader of another village bestowed the title on 3 ninja, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru. The Hokage had made the rank official and it had remained with them to Konoha. However, the system had a flaw, and ever since Orochimaru's defection, there had been a void for. Thud. Hinata made a quick left turn, aiming to find the source of the sound that had come from somewhere behind her. She was shocked to discover that the window had been pushed open from the outside. A big man quickly swung in feet first, landing a short distance away from the opening and dusting himself off. Stuck the landing. I'd love to see someone else my age do something like that. Well, look what we have here. Naruto got himself another visitor. A lady visitor. Jiraiya, a renowned Sannin from Konoha, was in front of her. She immediately straightened her posture out of deference and hurriedly tried to come up with a response. Would he discipline her for violating hospital policies? Was he here to harm Naruto in some way? She moved slowly to the side, placing herself squarely between Jiraiya and Naruto. As a result, Toad Sage gave her a low laugh, then moved to the desk next to her and sat down. Jiraiya calmly gestured for her to sit down and said, "Please relax. I'm not here to hurt anybody." With her heart still racing from the circumstances, Hinata glanced to her left and right before choosing to sit down on the bed beside Naruto. Jiraiya started, "How about this? After giving it some thought, I didn't expect you to be here, but I think it will turn out for the better, since you're all tied up in this anyway. Let me introduce myself as Jiraiya, the greatest spy and informant of Konoha. From here on out, assume I know everything about you and your team. I think it will be beneficial to let you in on some information, and in return, you do a little favor for me." Hinata stayed quiet as she considered what he had just said and attempted to make sense of everything that had been confusing her. Was Jiraiya aware of their team? To what extent could he know? Why would he give a damn? He rolled his eyes, clearly thinking what she was thinking. With a slight smile, he added, "Still don't believe me? I'm sure you'll eventually see that I'm telling the truth, given your excellent eyesight." She unconsciously moved a hand up to the side of her face, around her temples, as her eyes widened in surprise. Although the skin was smooth now, she was aware that veins would start to show up as soon as she pushed chakra into her eyes. Jiraiya was then aware of her Byakugan awakening. Only Sasuke and Kakashi were aware that it had only occurred a few days prior. "You seemed more surprised than I did," Jiraiya went on, clearly reveling in his knowledge. I figured that you would awaken the Byakugan at some point in your ninja career. I'm actually surprised that no one else knew. Am I the only one who thinks that you look exactly like a Hyuga? Seriously. The second I saw you in the orphanage with Naruto, I looked into who your parents were. Your mother was one of the last surviving Senju, but no one knew who your father was, so I did a little digging, and within the week I found out. With all of this new information, Hinata's head was spinning. Jiraiya was far more knowledgeable than she had thought. Where should she even start asking questions? She was fortunate that he didn't even give her an opportunity to interrupt. Yes, although everyone likes to think that your mother was the last surviving Senju who happened to die during childbirth, they all seem to forget that Tsunade, one of the other Sannin, also has Senju blood in her. And again, yes, I'm sure you've made the connection now, but your father was indeed a Hyuga. Now, since spiritual and physical bloodline limits mix quite well, it turns out you have both the ability to learn every single element type jutsu and combine chakra, and you have the Byakugan. I'm sure Hiashi is going to have a field day when he finds this out. You have the body of a Senju and the eyes of a Hyuga. I'm serious, if you haven't looked at a mirror in a while, take a look. Hinata hurried to her feet and moved toward the room's sink, which just so happened to have a mirror above it. She had been so busy taking care of herself and Naruto that she hadn't looked at a mirror since coming back, and when she did, she saw a different face staring back at her. She was shocked to see that her eyes were as pale and pupilless as a Hyuga's, as Jiraiya had described. Jiraiya listened to her for a few moments before saying, "Awakening the Byakugan has caused your eyes to permanently change. You look just like a Hyuga now. Now, a quick trivia question. How many people in the Hyuga clan have mixed bloodline limits like you do?" Hinata thought of an answer in less than a second, but Jiraiya wouldn't even wait for her to respond before he started talking again. He grinned and said, "0 is correct," as she walked slowly back to Naruto's bed. The Hyuga clan is very particular about their unique bloodline and are careful not to allow it to mix with any other clan. After researching it, I discovered that it is legal for the Hyuga to marry another Hyuga or, in certain situations, someone with no bloodline limit at all. This is why it made sense that no one knew your father's identity. Your parents' marriage had to be kept secret because it would have been extremely problematic if the Hyuga or the Senju clan discovered that their members had broken clan law. My next question was whether your father was still alive and in the Hyuga clan or if he had died like your mother. Jiraiya went on, "I looked up all of the deaths of people in the Hyuga clan around a year prior to your birth. There weren't many, but his death stood out quite a bit. Given that you've never been contacted by your father, I figured that it was unfortunately the latter. You see, on the day of the Senju massacre, a certain Hyuga happened to pass away. Now, why would a Senju massacre have resulted in the death of a Hyuga? In one way or another, he would have needed to be in the Senju clan's compound, and why would a Hyuga be there? I think it's because he was protecting your mother, or at least spending time with her. I mean, the proof is right in front of us. A Hyuga died that night, and all the Senju in Konoha were killed except for your mother. A final question remains. Why did your father die instead of your mother during the massacre? And maybe that relates to this question. Why was your mother the only Senju in Konoha to survive? I don't have an official answer to that, but I would guess that your father had a major role to play in saving your mom. The Senju murderer wouldn't be expecting someone with a Byakugan, after all." As she continued to take in this information, Hinata swallowed and blinked rapidly. She was unsure of how to respond to him. A renowned Sannin had come in and started telling her detailed information about her family, which she had never even met. With concern in her eyes, Hinata whispered, Why are you telling me this? Did he anticipate receiving anything in exchange?" Jiraiya chuckled quietly. "So you believe me? I'm glad, but that's not the most unbelievable thing that you're going to learn this morning. Remember, I said that I'm going to ask you for a little favor. Tell me, how much do you care about Naruto?" Without hesitation, she said, "Naruto's my best friend." Unconsciously, she held fast to the bed linens underneath her. Beyond simply being her best friend, Naruto served as a kind of roadmap for her. With his radiant smile, Naruto was there to support her whenever she veered off course and from her objectives, preventing her from falling. Her words may not have been very convincing to Jiraiya, but he must have understood her meaning from her eyes because he flashed a big knowing smile that made Hinata blush a little. Jiraiya's smile came and went as fast as it had appeared. His words were level. "I'm glad that he has someone like you," he said. "He's probably too stupid to even realize how much you care for him. I'm going to do something without his permission, but it's for his own benefit. What I need from you is a promise. Promise me that after you hear what I'm about to say, you won't abandon Naruto." Hinata was completely unprepared for this. and her pale eyes widened in shock. If Jiraiya didn't already know herself, what could she possibly say about Naruto? Unless... I'm going to tell you what exactly happened to Naruto on the bridge. I'm going to tell you who Naruto is. Konoha in the afternoon. Naruto sat up as soon as he regained consciousness, and the intense lights that burst into his eyes momentarily blinded him. After a moment of squinting and eye-rubbing, he looked around and discovered that he was sitting in a hospital bed once more. Then the soft touch of the sheets covering him, and finally the silent ambiance of rhythmically beeping machines. The faint voice that startled him from the side was the last sense to hit him. Sorry to wake you, but I thought that you'd thank me for it later. This is the final night before the exams. They start tomorrow, you know. It was an uncanny familiar voice. He was reminded of his last hospital awakening by something in this scene. But he had been temporarily blind, and when he had woken up, someone had been in his room. When he saw who it was, his nearly certain belief that this man and the previous one shared a voice essentially disappeared. Leaning against the windowsill and gazing out at the orange evening sky was none other than Jiraiya the Toad Sage, one of the fabled Sannin. Naruto was taken aback by the man's height and width, as well as the absurd quantity of white hair that fell over his back, since he had only ever seen portraits of him. With a sly expression on his face, Jiraiya turned to face Naruto and asked, "Do you remember me? I think you were old enough. I had a quick talk with you before when you had been blinded for a little while." With his eyes widening, Naruto thought it was him. Jiraiya went on, sounding remarkably composed for his next statement. "Good, I see you do remember. Last time, Madara had taken control over you and you had killed 3 people using his ocular powers, which is why you were blind for a while. This time, you were lucky enough not to have any more senseless death on your head." Naruto's jaw dropped open in surprise. Was that all Jiraiya said? Hold on, how did Jiraiya find out about Madara? He didn't know of anyone else who was aware that Madara was also sealed inside, even though it was pretty widely known that Naruto was a Jinchuriki. When did he start killing 3 people? Jiraiya turned entirely to face him and said bluntly, "Don't waste time asking stupid questions, because I won't answer them." In order to sit facing Naruto, he snatched a chair from a nearby desk and turned it around. "It's my profession to know as much information as I can. I was your father's sensei. I taught him the very seal which he used to capture the 2 demons within you. I was the first to know about Madara. When the old man summoned me to check over your seal, there were several differences that could only mean that an adjustment was made to capture another being with chakra. The Hokage summoned me again to check the seal some years ago after Itachi had reported that you used strange Sharingan techniques to kill 3 cloud ninja who were trying to kidnap Hinata at the time. Your father was my greatest prodigy when it came to seals, but even he couldn't adapt quick enough in time. Your seal is imperfect, Naruto. The Kyuubi is sealed within you behind bars that he cannot escape, but Madara is all but free to roam about your subconscious." Naruto took a swallow. Jiraiya seemed to be telling the truth. He tried to maintain eye contact with Jiraiya while asking himself, "Madara, is this true? Did you kill 3 people using me? Well, did you?" Jiraiya interrupted, shocking Naruto once more. "There's no use trying to communicate with Madara right now," she said. "I've sealed away your mental connection to him for the time being. I have no idea how long it will last, but whatever Raizo, the ex-Cloud Akatsuki, did to you on the bridge, it disrupted your chakra system powerfully enough to give me time to block him from your mind and chakra system." As Naruto attempted, without success, to access Madara's subconscious, his eyes narrowed in both fear and rage. His voice was weak from lack of use, so he yelled at Jiraiya, "Why did you do that? What right do you have? Who are you to?" Smack! Jiraiya's palm instantly caused Naruto's cheek to sting as his head swung sideways. When he turned back to face Jiraiya, the icy, lethal gaze he was getting from the Sannin instantly put out any rage he might have had. "What right?" Jiraiya inquired, seemingly preparing to execute another backhand. "Your father died sealing Madara within you to protect the village, and this is the second time that you've let Madara take control. Do you ever think of the consequences? Did you ever think that the most renowned and evil ninja of all existence doesn't want to serve you as a pet and that anything he makes you do is for his gain? You've been taken over twice by the very man who dedicated his life to destroying the village your father died to protect, that my friends have died to protect, that my family has died to protect. I think I have a right. There are hundreds of villagers who want you dead because they fear you can't control the power within you, and yet you prove them right by letting Madara take control." Naruto was struck by this. Hard. He felt as though all the air had been sucked out of his lungs by a punch to the chest. Why hadn't he considered that? Why had he allowed Madara to take over because he was so complacent? Jiraiya went on, I don't want to even get started on that, as his tone softened. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to let you know the current situation that you're in. As I said, the Chunin exams start tomorrow, and despite all that has happened, Kakashi wants you and your team to participate. Not only that, but the Hokage has agreed, despite my arguments. I'm only telling you this instead of him because I'm going to become your next sensei, after these exams. Hello. My name is Jiraiya. It's a pleasure to meet you. Naruto didn't want to respond, but his tone was a little sarcastic. His head started to ache from the constant barrage of new information. The exams of Chunin. But at last, he remembered something that he had previously forgotten. He snapped back to Jiraiya and asked, what about the mission? What happened to my team? Jiraiya, obviously anticipating this, nodded. Even though this mission turned into a borderline S-rank mission, it was successful. No one on your team was seriously hurt. You arrived in Konoha 2 days ago, and our skilled medical ninja were able to heal everyone's injuries almost instantly. Reports also show that the bridge was completed. At last, Zabuza was confirmed dead, and his injured assistant was brought back here with you and is currently being held in prison. We are awaiting orders from Kiri as to how to deal with her. She is likely to be executed here because it is too risky and expensive to transport powerful ninja from village to village. Finally, we have verified that Raizo, the most notorious ninja in Kumogakure and the assassin of the previous Raikage, was the Akatsuki ninja who killed Zabuza. Along with Orochimaru, he is Akatsuki's second confirmed S-rank villain. We have good reason to think that Akatsuki is home to some of the deadliest and most dangerous criminals on the planet, making them much more dangerous than previously thought. The only reason I'm telling you this is because I know you're very interested in the company. Naruto was understandably perplexed. What? How did you find out? The door to Naruto's room was knocked on, and both Jiraiya and Naruto turned. After a brief pause, the door opened, and Saito, a perfect replica of Naruto, entered the room. As though anticipating Saito's arrival, Jiraiya went on, this shadow clone of yours has been a thorn in my side for quite a while, adding, yet again, you've done something that you shouldn't have without considering the consequences. Indeed, it's amazing that you were able to produce a clone this flawless and durable. However, you should never make a clone that will survive for a long time outside of an immediate conflict. Naruto glanced at Jiraiya and his clone, who had an odd expression on his face. What was wrong with his clone, who was just carrying on Naruto's studies while he was on a mission? A clone will surely start to distance themselves from your conscience if you allow them to live this long. Before long, the clone will genuinely mistake himself for you. Naruto, don't pretend to be God. The shadow clone method is prohibited for several reasons. It differs from an elemental clone. Dispel him right away. As he turned to face his clone, who still had an odd expression on his face, he had to ponder this realization for a moment. Would his clone actually mistake himself for the real Naruto? It didn't seem possible, but as Naruto raised his hand to create a half-chakra seal to release his clone, the clone briefly opened his mouth and spoke. It was odd for Naruto to hear his own voice coming from someone else. You're wrong, Jiraiya, he declared. I don't confuse myself for Naruto. I am aware of my differences and my identity. Saito is my name. Saito held up his own seal and dispersed himself before Naruto could do it himself, and smoke exploded from where he had been standing. Before he could think of anything else, he was struck by a wave of memories and thoughts that were so overwhelming that he rolled his eyes back and fell unconscious once more. The Chunin exams morning. With a sigh of relief, Yu Takata took a seat at what appeared to be a well-known ramen stand and decided to stop for a bite to eat. Since the first test of the 3-part Chunin exam was being held at Konoha's Ninja Academy, he was certain that it would be an academic test or something similar. Otherwise, why would they be meeting in a classroom? In any case, he believed that the bite to eat was exactly what his brain needed to fully awaken and get ready for whatever test was approaching. While the shop's kind old owner was preparing his ramen dish, he idly blew bubbles out of his special pipe and thought about the unexpected turn of events that had occurred a few days prior, the day he and his team were scheduled to depart AIM for Konoha. Kimimaro was upset, but the Amikage had already selected a different sensei for them. Raizo and Kimimaro had returned from their mission successfully, but Raizo was no longer going to be their sensei. The Amikage had decided at the last minute that it was too risky because the Cloud Ninja at the exams would undoubtedly recognize the well-known villain. Their Jonin sensei was Hidan, the 9th commander of Akatsuki and the commander of a main attack force regiment of Akatsuki. Once more, this seemed excessive to him. In addition to their team consisting of 2 lieutenant commanders and an S-ranked commander, their sensei was another commander that specialized in killing and was notoriously irritable. In other words, he didn't even like Hidan. Although they hadn't interacted much, the white-haired man frightened him, and appeared to be a physical embodiment of fear and death. Utakata had heard tales of Hidan's immortality, and that he had total control of shadows, whatever that meant. The Amikage seemed to expect something strange to happen at the exams, and he wanted to make sure that the AIM team made it to the finals and that a Hidan was present throughout. He shuddered, preferring Raizo, who appeared to be just as laid back as he was, but Hidan wasn't as well known in the ninja world as Raizo was. Hidan was more of a myth than anything else. The strange presence at his side caused Utakata's thoughts to pause, and he turned to his left, where 3 Konoha ninja had just entered the ramen bar, engaged in their own conversation. None of them appeared unusual, but there was something off about the blonde kid in the center, surrounded by an aura that was both strange and familiar. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was almost as if he could feel the presence of. When Utakata realized that the ninja was a Jinchuriki, his eyes widened. The blonde said, "I'm surprised that Kakashi would even allow us to take the exam, considering what happened," with Utakata interrupting him in the middle. "Honestly, I'm just glad that we all survived and that I didn't unintentionally hurt either of you." Exam? There was another Jinchuriki taking the exam? Whoa, this complicated matters. They had to watch out for Orochimaru's teammate Masahiro, Sasori's apprentice, and now there was reportedly another Jinchuriki. "We're going to have to watch each other's backs," the girl with blonde hair continued. "Saito, a clone of mine who I left at Konoha, discovered that Suna has sent their own Jinchuriki to compete, a red-haired boy about my age who had a murderous persona. Another, 3 Jinchuriki, an Akatsuki commander, Gurren, and Sasori's apprentice." He briefly questioned whether any real genin were involved in this. He would have to inform his team about the other 2 Jinchuriki. He wasn't concerned about Kimimaro, but Gurren could be easily taken by surprise. "We've been searching everywhere for you, and there you are." Any chance of him having a quiet meal before the exams was gone, though, as Gurren's familiar voice cut through his thoughts and made him turn around, which in turn caused the Konoha ninja team to turn around as well. To his annoyance, Gurren was standing behind with her typical irritated look on her face. "I told you I was probably going to get something to eat," he replied. "It's not my fault if." When he realized that Gurren was no longer focusing on him, he trailed off. Her usual look of annoyance was replaced by another look that he recognized as well. The look she usually gave him before attempting to cut off his head, though it seemed even more powerful this time. Oddly, she wasn't even looking at him this time. He glanced to his side and saw that, although all 3 of the Konoha ninja were staring at her, the dark-haired man in the middle appeared to be the target of Gurren's death glare. Despite how unlikely it was, he couldn't help but wonder if they had met before. A jade crystal the size of a small katana was growing out of her arm like a makeshift tanto, and by the time he turned back to Gurren, she had already closed half the distance to the Konoha ninja. Utakata was caught off guard, barely able to get off his stool before she closed the distance completely. Clang! The Konoha ninja was as fast as Gurren and had defended himself by drawing a kunai before Gurren could cut his head off. "What are you doing?" Fortunately for them, it was early enough in the morning that not many people were on the streets to witness this. The last thing they needed was to unintentionally start a feud or war with Konoha because Gurren chose to kill a random genin. Utakata shouted out, hurriedly wrapping his arms around her while attempting to pull her away from him. "Leave me alone." She struggled violently and hissed in protest, saying, "He killed my parents, I've located him at last." Gurren took advantage of Utakata's momentary confusion by elbowing him in the gut and knocking him backwards. After she was free, she charged forward once more, ready to attack the Konoha ninja, but he caught a glimpse of the blonde Jinchuriki quickly drawing his own kunai and leaping forward to stop him. Crap, this wasn't good. For a long, noticeable second, time seemed to slow down, and Gurren and the blonde ninja stopped where they were, frozen to the ground. Utakata realized that time had not slowed down, but that the 2 were actually immobile, frozen to the ground. "Kimimaro, remind me again why I haven't killed your petulant, loud-mouthed, bitch of a teammate." From behind him came the smooth, evil, dark voice of their sensei, Hidan, who was approaching the scene with Kimimaro at his heels. How had he stopped Gurren and the Jinchuriki? Hidan was dressed in the usual Akatsuki robes, but as a commander he wore the straw hat that protected his face from the shadows, and Kimimaro had given up his commander's uniform in favor of the standard Akatsuki one, which had a hood instead of a high collar. "Listen up, you little bitch," Hidan went on, still moving forward in a composed manner. "If you do anything else like this to jeopardize us being here, I'll fucking kill you." Something was definitely wrong with the way he spoke, and Utakata couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it seemed like the commander's voice cut right to the core of his being. "You can't get help from Kimimaro. Damn it, I'm not a babysitter. I shouldn't have to worry about you killing someone if I take my eyes off you for 3 minutes." When the blonde ninja was freed from Hidan's jutsu, he momentarily stumbled to the ground. Utakata's quick eyes saw a shadow beneath the ninja dart away, a small circle, heading straight back to merge with Hidan's own shadow. The blonde sheathed his kunai and backed away slowly to his friends after realizing that his friend was no longer in apparent danger. "Sasuke, what's the matter?" Upon his return, he inquired. "Who is this girl? Even so, how do you know her?" Sasuke's expression said it all. "Naruto, I've never seen this girl before in my life." Gurren, still ensnared in Hidan's shadow, seemed both perplexed and infuriated upon hearing that. "Liar," she spat out at him, although no longer struggling to free herself. "You're lying." She sounded less convincing the second time, and she looked directly into Sasuke's face as though she was trying to relive her memories and validate something that Utakata was unaware of. He didn't even know that Gurren's parents had been killed. Most young ninja, like himself, had either severing all ties to their former village or had no parents at all, so how could someone who wasn't older than Gurren have killed her parents so long ago? Gurren must have been realizing the same thing. Light sparkles flew off with the breeze as the crystal on her wrist started to dissolve into nothing with an inaudible noise. Before she could say another word, the dark shadow beneath her sprang up to her body so fast that Utakata hardly noticed, then made her turn to face Hidan, who stared down at her with a devilish smile, licked his lips, and was about to say something when Kimimaro leapt next to Gurren and put an arm around her in a supportive manner. "Gurren," Kimimaro said, attempting to reassure his subordinate, who now appeared to be trembling with fear or rage, "calm down. Everything will be fine. You can now release her, Hidan-sama, she is under control." After a moment or two, the faint shadow that covered Gurren seemed to think about something, but then it shot down to the ground and back to Hidan, who gave them both a small smile before vanishing into the crowd, somehow, despite his odd attire. Gurren did the same, and as soon as Hidan was out of sight, she ran away from the group, jumping off and out of sight. Utakata let out a breath he didn't even realize he was holding, realizing how close he had been to witnessing someone die before exams even began. A few moments of silence seemed to pass before the sounds of the early morning street life started to fill the atmosphere. "Hey," when Kimimaro first noticed the Konoha ninja group at the bar, he interrupted, saying, "Naruto, Sasuke, Hinata. What is going on?" When the 3 Konoha ninja all got up to greet Kimimaro, Utakata had to sit back once more, completely bewildered. Gurren had initially assumed that she knew Sasuke, but now it seemed that Kimimaro knew all 3 of them. He sighed, finished his bowl of ramen, and left for the first exam, hoping to escape this weird and annoying circumstance as soon as possible. The academy, reacquainting themselves with Kimimaro, had been fairly brief, as the exams officially began within the hour. According to Kakashi, the exam would take place in a huge classroom that would fit the large amount of genin participating, but he had asked to meet them in a side hallway just before they entered. Team 7 entered the academy through a rear entrance, hoping to avoid the large crowds of ninja and observers entering through the front. Speaking with Kimimaro had been, to put it mildly, unsettling. Everyone knew that Kimimaro was ridiculously strong, but the white-haired young teen claimed that the rest of his team was far above Chunin level. Kimimaro had said to them before leaving, "I know you 3 are really strong, and you definitely deserve to become Chunin, but avoid my team. Gurren seems to want to kill you, Sasuke, and they're incredibly strong. I genuinely don't know why, but if I were you, I would keep an eye out for her." The Chunin exams were more of a showing off of each village's ninja, so each great village had the right to promote their own ninja to whatever ranks they deemed appropriate. Naruto sighed, wondering briefly if he and his team would be the only ninja being genin at this exam. Naruto finally said, "Hey guys, I'm going to go and use the bathroom really quickly," before leaving down a familiar hallway. Hey, he had just eaten a lot of ramen, and he didn't want to have to use the restroom during whatever the first test was going to be. If it was in a classroom, it was probably going to be a written test. The thought made his stomach turn. Sure, he was really smart, smarter than most actually, since Madara had always made him study, but he had always detested taking tests. It had been relatively easy when Madara could communicate with him. The ancient Uchiha may be known as an evil and powerful ninja, but he was surprisingly knowledgeable, but Jiraiya had cut off that communication forever. A wave of nostalgia washed over him as he entered the academy's cafeteria, which had a bathroom, and he recalled what it was like to be a student, eager to graduate and on the same team as his two best friends. He laughed when he realized how naive that seemed to him, not even a chunin yet, and having experienced death several times, he couldn't help but wonder if his future was going to. When Naruto's thoughts wandered, he saw something standing out in the cafeteria and instantly froze in place. The red-haired Jinchuriki from earlier was standing in the center of the room with his arms crossed, and he locked eyes with him. Almost instantly, Naruto felt a wave of killer intent that caused his hand to slink down to his side, where his kunai pouch was. He was no longer some fresh out of the academy rookie genin. He had been in danger before, had repelled assassins and Zabuza when it counted most, and although the red-haired ninja had once intimidated him, he was now stronger, more seasoned, more. "I'm going to kill you." His thoughts were interrupted once more by the ninja, whose voice was so clear and confident that Naruto had to believe him. The ninja had a murderous and sadistic grin on his face, as though he was dreaming about killing Naruto right then and there. He went on, still wearing a maniacal smile, "I can sense the hatred inside you. You're a weapon, just like me. I'm ecstatic because killing you will demonstrate my value." Pop! There was a hissing sound as soon as something on the ninja's back, possibly a lid of some kind, popped off, and sand started to flow out of the thin scabbard on his back and float in the air around him. This was crazy because the exams hadn't even begun yet, and if Naruto attacked, he could risk being kicked out with his team. However, if he hesitated, he had little doubt that the red-haired ninja was going to strike. What was wrong with this guy? He was definitely not right in his head. Would Naruto escape the room in time to avoid contact? Thud. A moment later, a shield of sand materialized on the ninja's side, and a spear-headed chain embedded itself in it with such force that, had it not been stopped, it would have flown straight through the sand ninja's head. The sand ninja, equally as shocked as Naruto, glanced down the chain to the side of the room, where a hooded and cloaked ninja was extending his arm, with the chain appearing to have come from somewhere inside his sleeve. With a fast-paced, gear-like sound, the chain retreated into the ninja's sleeve just as quickly as it had appeared. Two more ninja, both with bright red hair that fell past their shoulders and one with grayish-white hair, emerged from behind the original newcomer, both wearing similar cloaks without the hood drawn up. After a second of concentration, Naruto recognized the marks on their ninja headbands. These ninja were from the Sound Village. The girl said anxiously to the hooded person who had attacked Gaara, "Masahiro-sama, be careful. Both of them are Jinchuriki. The blonde possesses a particularly strong and sinister chakra." Naruto took a sharp breath, his heart pounding once more. How did AIM Girl know about him? She recognized that he and Gaara were both Jinchuriki right away. Could she be a sensory-type ninja? The hooded ninja slowly said, "I don't care about the blonde one," in a dark, strained voice that seemed to be seething with rage. Then, with a shunshin, he leapt forward and appeared between Naruto and Gaara, with his back mostly to Naruto. "Sabaku no Gaara, Gaara of the desert, it's so good to see you again." The momentum of his body caused the bottom of his cloak to blow to the side momentarily, which caused Naruto's eyes to focus on something that clearly stuck out. Masahiro wasn't wearing the purple pants that he had seen Kimimaro wear with his uniform. Instead, he was wearing dark shorts made in a similar fashion. It was obvious why. Masahiro's right leg from the knee down was completely metallic, like a puppet part, with small gears moving as he shifted his weight to one side. After a half a second, his cloak returned and hid his leg. His cloak, along with his two partners, was also different from the Akatsuki robe Naruto had seen Kimimaro wearing. It was black in color with several red clouds on it, but it was much looser, and instead of the high collar that covered much of Kimimaro's face, his robe had a hood. Directly in the upper center of his back, Naruto read the kanji of 4, and that same kanji was on the each shoulder facing out. He also noticed that Masahiro's sleeve had two blood-red stripes going diagonally across the forearm sections, while his partner's didn't. His hood also fell back in the process, revealing red hair slightly darker than Gaara's, though it fell loosely down his face. Why were Sound Ninja wearing those robes? Gaara's expression appeared to return to its usual emotionless state. "I can't say the same," he said stoically, as if his previous murderous rage had vanished. With an insane grin spreading across his face, Masahiro went on, No, you shouldn't be happy. You see, ever since our last meeting, I've been training diligently every day. For the sole purpose of getting strong enough to murder you, I have pushed myself to the limit. I joined Akatsuki only to train under the best and strongest so that one day I could face you again with the ability to kill you, you pathetic monster. Naruto's gaze immediately shifted to Masahiro's teammates, who, oddly enough, appeared equally as shocked as he was, as though they had never heard of this about their teammate. From the emotion in his voice to the way he was breathing heavily, it was clear that Masahiro was excited and telling the truth, and Naruto knew that he needed to leave this situation as soon as possible because every second he lingered increased the likelihood that he would be thrown into a fight that he desperately wanted to avoid. Unfortunately, Masahiro went on, his excitable tone lowering a bit. I wouldn't be able to kill you in time before other ninja were alerted and stopped us with your absolute defense. Don't worry, though. I'm confident I'll have lots of opportunities once we finish testing in the classroom and enter the field. Don't flatter yourself, said Gaara, who appeared unfazed as usual. If you believe you can kill me, I can see you're just a stupid pawn in Akatsuki's scheme. But I don't care about that. At night, I'll be on rooftops. I would be more than pleased to put an end to your suffering there if you can locate me. Gaara disappeared in a whirl of sand, and Masahiro snarled in annoyance as he shimmered back to his teammates' positions and, without a word, began to leave the room, his team trailing closely behind. The academy, that was it. As Team 7 stood in front of the rear doors leading to the testing room, a lot of people were talking, and Naruto had managed to get back together with his team, telling them about the strange encounter he had with Gaara and Masahiro, especially Masahiro, since Naruto had never heard of him before. It seemed like there was another ninja competing in these exams who was extremely powerful, assuming that Masahiro had to be strong if he thought he could kill Gaara. Suddenly, Naruto felt much better about the Chunin exams being a written test. Perhaps Gaara and the AIM ninja were bad at math and would fail the Chunin exams before the fighting even started. Are all of you prepared for this? As he prepared to push the doors open, Naruto asked, glancing at Sasuke and Hinata, who both had composed and self-assured expressions on their faces. Team 7 had already been through a lot together in such a short period of time. They were ready to become Chunin, and they knew it. Sasuke and Hinata had both been in life or death situations, and he knew that he could definitely rely on them if he needed to. Sasuke's ocular powers were as strong as Naruto's, and his ninjutsu was even better. Hinata's unique blend of taijutsu and juken was an amazing asset to their team. Additionally, with the addition of Hinata's Byakugan, their fighting-based team had immediately turned into something akin to a recon team, as her eyes could see through anything and detect chakra for miles. The few people who were aware of Hinata's Byakugan at the time were shocked, and Naruto himself almost didn't believe it when Sasuke told him that she had used her new ocular powers to fight Haku on the bridge, but Hinata was able to activate her eyes at will and showed them to him. The biggest question that remained unanswered was, how, being a Senju, it was obviously impossible for her to somehow awaken a Kekkei Genkai that had nothing to do with her bloodline. Naruto, who had learned a lot about Kekkei Genkai in the past, had to assume that one of Hinata's parents was a Hyuga, but for some reason, Hinata had been aloof since the bridge and they had avoided discussing anything. That didn't matter now, though, because the Chunin exams were what mattered. He had a strange feeling that these exams would change everything, but he wasn't sure why. Naruto's eyes darted left and right as he took his first few steps into the familiar classroom. He remembered taking tests in this very room not too long ago as a student in the academy, and his eyes were drawn to the hundreds of different ninja headbands. Cloud ninja over here, grass ninja there, ninja from Iwa. His heart was pounding in his chest, but despite his nervousness, few people in the room even turned to look at him or noticed his team entrance. When he saw the familiar Konoha headband symbol, he instinctively began to move in the direction of what he knew to be a group of Konoha ninja. Sasuke and Hinata were right behind him, and he recognized the faces of the group right away. They were Team 8 and Team 10, the 6 other genin who had graduated from the academy with him. Hey guys, how are you? As Team 7 joined the group of Konoha ninja, Kiba greeted them loudly. Naruto raised an eyebrow in curiosity and looked directly into Kiba's eyes before quickly scanning the other genin. They didn't know death like Team 7 did. They still had a certain naivete in their faces, something that wasn't present in Naruto, Sasuke, and Hinata anymore. Granted, ninja know that they have signed their lives away to Konoha and the Hokage, but it is unlikely that a genin will be placed on many deadly missions. Neither Kiba nor any of these other Konoha genin had killed anyone yet, and Naruto briefly questioned whether the other genin were even prepared to turn into Chunin. Naruto's upbeat attitude abruptly changed after Kiba must have noticed the expression in his eyes. Hey man, we all heard a little about what happened on your C-rank mission, he said, turning to face Sasuke and Hinata. Are you guys alright? According to reports, several A-rank jonin attacked you, and even Akatsuki appeared. All of that isn't true, is it? While Sasuke started to explain what had happened to them, Naruto fell into a slight daze, and his eyes darted around the room again, seeing the AIM team a short while earlier, with the ninja named Masahiro, coolly leaning against a distant wall, his hood up again, and his two teammates behind him. Masahiro looked like yet another big test obstacle, another strong ninja that Naruto hoped to avoid completely. Perhaps in the past, Naruto would have been eager to prove himself against strong ninja, but after fighting Zabuza and knowing what it was like to know that any slip or mistake would result in his death or the death of a teammate, Naruto wasn't eager to engage in another battle like that. Following Masahiro's gaze, Naruto noticed Gaara on the opposite side of the room, seemingly alone despite the large number of people present. Unlike many others, Gaara appeared unconcerned with almost everyone else in the room. Naruto recalled the moment when Masahiro had confronted Gaara and wondered how they had met, whether Masahiro had come from Suna initially or if Gaara had some sort of connection to Akatsuki and... Oof. As everyone's attention was drawn to the disturbance, a small cloud of smoke filled the front of the classroom, and after a few seconds, the smoke cleared to reveal a large man in a dark coat standing with his arms crossed. Naruto recognized the ninja as Ibiki Morino, a special jonin and the leader of Konoha's torture and interrogation force. He had a menacing look on his face due to scars covering the rest of his face and a bandana covering his head. "You're standing," Ibiki commanded with a voice like cracking thunder. After a half-second of utter silence, the room was filled with the scraping of chairs as any ninja who had been sitting down immediately stood up, knocking chairs back in the process. His voice wasn't augmented with chakra in any way that Naruto could sense, but it was just naturally loud and sharp enough for most people in the room to flinch at its volume. Once everyone was standing and silent, Ibiki spoke again. "I don't care to tell any of you my name, just like I don't care about any of your names. The Chunin exam's first test will be facilitated by me. The Chunin exam will be divided into 3 sections, for those of you who are unaware. Since over half of you will fail my first test, I won't go into detail about the second 2 sections. That will be my top priority." The room remained loudly silent, and Naruto started to worry more about what Morino had in store for them than he did about the strong ninja he might encounter there. "You will all have 10 seconds to locate a seat in any of the rows in this room upon the command to take seats. Anyone who remains standing for more than 15 seconds will be declared a failure and removed from the exam right away." There was more silence, and Naruto's gaze shifted to the seats closest to him. He and the other Konoha ninja were nearer the door, and numerous ninja were already positioned directly in front of the chairs they had been occupying. "Take seats." The room exploded with sound again as everyone rushed to find a seat, some even diving into the chairs and skidding a little on the ground. Naruto would probably have laughed if he hadn't been so focused on finding his own seat. The first 2 he had planned to sit in were taken just before he got there, so he ran to the back of the room, where there were still empty seats in the rows, and sat down with a few seconds to spare, and the seats on his left and right were soon filled. Freeze. Since everyone was seated, except for Ibiki and the unfortunate ninja who stood in the front with a deer in the headlights expression on his face and was frozen in a nearly comical posture, Naruto's heart continued to race as he searched the room for his dispersed teammates. He briefly wondered if Ibiki would be understanding of the older genin because... "Team 27 on your feet, Konoha." Ibiki gave the order again, and 2 more ninja in the crowd slowly rose to their feet, their faces filled with fear as everyone turned to stare at them. Naruto knew they were Konoha ninja, but he didn't know their names. Everyone fails. These disappointments should be escorted out of the room by Task Force 1. When the doors opened and dozens of uniformed Konoha ninja filed in the sides, 3 of them violently grabbed the standing genin and dragged them back to the doors. Naruto's eyes widened in response to the majority of the room. "Wait!" The original genin who had been left standing began to shout out as they neared the door. "What the hell? This is impossible. You are unable to..." Slam. Silence returned to the room as the doors slammed behind him. The Task Force Konoha ninja, who were arranged along the sides of the rows, took their seats simultaneously in response to an unidentified cue, and all eyes turned back to Ibiki, who was the last person in the room. He started off by professionally clasping his hands behind his back. "Let me make this crystal clear," he said. "If I can fail every single one of you before the second part of the exam starts, then I will have done my job well. For the few of you who may pass my portion of the exam, there won't be anyone to say that you didn't deserve it. I am not here to help you. My task force along the walls are not here to help you. The Hokage has assigned us to weed out the weak of mind, the weak of body, and the weak of spirit, in whatever way I deem necessary. The rules will be simple, he said once more, signaling the ninja on either side to rise and start passing out written tests to each of them. You will each receive identical tests consisting of 10 questions, he said. Obviously, you want to get as high a score as possible on the test. Your final score will determine whether you pass or fail. Having said that, cheating will not be accepted. You and the rest of your team will fail right away if you are found to have cheated 3 times. So it was a written test. If he cared so much about cheating, why would you be given 2 chances to get caught? Naruto's mind went into overdrive as soon as he looked down at the test that was placed face down in front of him. Without even glancing at the questions, he noticed something strange. There were only 9 questions, but Ibiki had undoubtedly said 10. Where was the 10th question? Following the task force's distribution of all the tests and reorganization along the rows, Ibiki looked to the left and then to the right before yelling, "Begin." The room was filled with the sound of papers flipping to the front, but Naruto took the time to confirm that the test actually had just 9 questions. He slowly turned the page over, and his heart sank a little when he saw the first question, which was a physics problem. Find the angle at which the kunai must be thrown in order to reach the target with an initial velocity of. The familiar scribble of someone several seats down from Naruto furiously writing down the answer to what appeared to be question 1 caught his attention, and he took the risk of a quick sideways glance. To his surprise, an older-looking genin was calmly writing down the answer past 2 genin who were sweating nervously and holding their heads in their hands. Naruto quickly looked away before the task force Chunin suspected him of cheating, wondering how someone had already started to figure out the answer when he hadn't read the problem. As he listened more intently, he noticed that 2 or 3 other people in the room were also frantically writing down the answers, as though they already knew what. Ibiki had given them 3 chances to be caught cheating because there was a team taking the test that was a part of Ibiki's task force, a team that already knew the answers. He glanced at the remaining questions for a moment, and even though Naruto was one of the smartest genin in his graduating class, he had little doubt that he wouldn't be able to answer any of them on his own. The test wasn't meant to determine how intelligent each genin was, but rather whether they could cheat and get away with it, which is why the task force was arranged on the sides in. Iwa, Team 4. Fail. As Ibiki's voice sliced through the pensive silence like a hot knife through butter, 3 genin in the crowd slowly rose and were led out of the room by one of the Chunin. Had someone been caught 3 times already? Naruto frantically searched the enormous room for Sasuke and Hinata to see if they were aware of the true nature of the test, but as he did so, he made eye contact with a Chunin on the side who instantly smiled at him before writing something on his clipboard. Whoa! His hands began to perspire with anxiety as Naruto's gaze returned to his own test. Had the Chunin already delivered his first blow? Alright, so he knew that he needed to cheat in order to pass the test, but how exactly was he going to do it? A person 2 seats to his side was writing down all of the answers, but Naruto couldn't copy his movements with his Sharingan without very obviously turning his head to the side and risking being caught, so he might as well just look at the answers then instead of using the Sharingan at all. The Sharingan? That might work. He bet that he could activate his eyes and copy the hand motions of someone nearby. However, that would only work if the person was at some angle in front of him. What else? What else did he have? The longer he took to solve a problem, the less time he had to copy down someone who had all the answers. The shadow clone. No, he was at a loss for how he could wait. After glancing to his left, down the row, past the Chunin observer, and toward the window that was now letting in the morning sunlight, Naruto grinned, glanced down at his test, took a few minutes to go over every question again, and then swiftly raised one hand in a half seal. Outside, sitting with his back against the academy wall, just below the window that separated him from all the other genin still taking the test inside, Naruto took a deep breath of the fresh air outside, grinning to himself as he felt the sun's rays hit him and fill him with warmth. He bet that he had no more than an hour to run over to the library and find the answers to the test's questions, and that he would also need to return to his apartment and retrieve his old notebooks that contained the physics and math equations he needed for a few problems. The feeling of splitting up his conscience into the clones was strange, but it reminded him of something faint that had been bothering him since he took his first breath moments ago. He decided it would be the quickest way to divide up the work, so he darted to the side, crouching low so he wouldn't be seen through the window, and as soon as he was in the clear, he held up his hand just like he had before and created a number of shadow clones, 2 of which went to his apartment and the rest of which sped off to the library. He wasn't Naruto, was he? No, he was merely a Naruto clone. Who was he? What was his name? His name was Saito, and he smiled for the second time as the memories began to return to him. Konoha. Elsewhere, Jiraiya started. These Chunin exams will be something to remember, while she and Kakashi Hatake stood on the academy's rooftops, watching Naruto's clones run off in different directions. Huh. It was clever of him to use shadow clones. He must have realized that they could transmit information to him once they dispersed. However, as I mentioned earlier, one of the few reasons I'm staying here is because something important is going to happen during these Chunin exams. It was quite exciting to be standing next to such a strong legend as Jiraiya, who is known to be one of the most powerful ninja in the world. Kakashi turned his gaze to the senior ninja. I thought you were here to replace me as Naruto's sensei? His tone was light and pleasant, as though he were joking when he asked. Jiraiya laughed and snorted. Naruto no longer requires a sensei. By sponsoring him some of the missions I get and staying behind to mentor his own training, I'll be more akin to a patron. However, that isn't why I'm here. So far, I've only told the Hokage, but I'm trying to find Orochimaru. I'm here for that reason. This caused Kakashi's eye to enlarge, and he lost his cool and pushed off the railing. Orochimaru is in Konoha? He asked incredulously, thinking that, aside from the Kyuubi's actual appearance, that was about the worst thing that could occur. Yep, Jiraiya said grimly, him and a few other top dogs from Akatsuki. Although I must confess that I had never heard of him prior to your report, Kimimaro, the white-haired child who appeared to accompany your team during your mission in Weeb, is taking part in these exams. Now, I'm going to venture the audacious guess that Kimimaro might be another Akatsuki commander if what you said is accurate and he had teamed up with Raizo in the wave. Let me continue before you ask questions. Why would the Amekage include Kimimaro in the tests? My guess supports some of my Orochimaru-related theories. Jiraiya said, Orochimaru is defecting from Akatsuki, which caused Kakashi's eyebrow to raise inquisitively. That's been my theory for the past few months. I don't think the Amekage is aware, but Orochimaru has been secretly communicating with the Kazekage. The Amekage is very secretive, and he never permits anyone in Akatsuki to communicate with other village leaders, which is why I think Orochimaru is doing so on his own terms. Now, my moles in Suna firmly believe that Orochimaru and the Kazekage are planning an attack on Konoha together. Despite being a member of Akatsuki, Orochimaru still has hundreds of his own loyal defects from his pseudo-village of Sound, and when our defense is at its weakest, I bet that he and Suna will attack the village during the third round of the Chunin exams. How does this relate to Kimimaro, then? If not to guarantee that AIM advances to the final round, why would the Amekage send such a formidable ninja to the exams? Keep in mind that the finalists' respective cages are invited to the stadium. If Orochimaru intends to betray AIM, and maybe the Amekage has a clue, like I do, he's making sure he'll be there to either help or stop the action. The worst-case scenario is that the Amekage is behind everything and the Akatsuki, Suna, and Orochimaru will attack Konoha simultaneously. Of course, this is the worst case since Konoha would unavoidably be destroyed within an hour. The best-case scenario is that the Amekage is on our side, and will assist Konoha in fending off Suna and Orochimaru. Jiraiya said, of course, I've told the Hokage all of my theories, but the best we can do for now is wait. We need to wait and see whose side the Amekage is on, and we need to wait for Orochimaru to make a mistake or do something that would validate my beliefs. I've been unable to contact the Kazekage for a while. We'll have to confront the Amekage in the third round because, aside from the 5 Kage, almost no one outside of AIM has ever seen him in person. I'm not even sure how the man looks. With a heavy sigh, Kakashi threw his hand through his wild gray hair and asked, where will you be during all of this? Jiraiya grinned broadly and said, I'll be keeping a careful eye on Naruto. It may not have occurred to you, but there's a certain man character glow about that boy. He has already experienced enough drama in his life to make a Jonin envious, and he is not even a teenager. Besides, I have to watch his seal. He letting the Kyuubi loose in the middle of the auditorium during the last round is the last thing we need to happen. Of course, if he gets there. The Academy Ibiki had given a 15-minute warning, and the room was still filled with the scribbling of pens, indicating that most people had undoubtedly found a way to cheat. About 45 minutes after Naruto had created his clone outside the window, his patience was starting to wear thin, and he tapped his fingers impatiently, staring down at his test, which was still blank. He had considered dispersing his clones from here, to get whatever information they had, but he chose to trust his main clone to disperse as soon as he was ready. Naruto's heart leapt to his throat every time Ibiki opened his mouth, especially when he dismissed Konoha teams, even though, much to his relief, none of Konoha's 9 newest genin had been released yet. At least 10 teams, 30 people, had been dismissed from the room, and members of the teams had been caught cheating 3 times. The sensation was addictive. Reliving hours and hours of study in a matter of seconds was quite the experience. Naruto's eyes widened as his head quickly filled with all the information he needed to pass the test over the course of 3 seconds. He realized that the reason it took so long was that his clones had actually solved all of the problems on their own, giving Naruto the impression that he had already finished the test. Since he didn't have time to think about the strange feelings he received from the clone who called himself Saito, he smiled to himself and started filling in his blank test with ease. He did, however, take a moment to wink at the Chunin Task Force observer at the end of his row, who was obviously perplexed as to how he suddenly knew all the answers. Even though Naruto had a correctly completed test in front of him, he was still incredibly anxious because he had no idea how Sasuke or Hinata had performed and because Ibiki had stated that there would be 10 questions, which meant that there was probably a final question he would ask at the end. By the time Naruto finished the 9th question, Ibiki had announced that there was only 1 minute left. Stop working. For a few moments, he and the task force looked for any indications of movement that would suggest someone was still trying to write, but people seemed to take Ibiki seriously and were afraid to try writing an extra letter down. Ibiki's sharp voice was followed immediately by the sounds of pens being dropped or placed down on the desks. Now that all the pens were down, Naruto tried to look around the room for both of his teammates again, hoping that they had done well even though there was nothing he could do to help them. After a nervous 30 seconds of searching, he saw Hinata 2 rows ahead of him and all the way down at the edge, closest to a Chunin observer. He imagined that cheating had been the easiest thing in the world for her because she had a Byakugan, which allowed her to see every test in the room, but instead of looking confident, she looked almost tearful, and Naruto couldn't help but curse in silence. Ibiki finally started, "I'm sure that some of the smarter ones among you are starting to wonder why the test you just took had only 9 questions. I told the truth. There are 10 questions on this test, with the hardest question being the 10th and last one. Gather the tests, task force." It paid to be cunning in the ninja profession, and Naruto proudly handed his test off with a small smirk, proud of the glare he earned himself from the Chunin who couldn't catch him cheating. The Chunin on the side swiftly got up and swept through the rows, picking up tests along the way, some of them clearly laughing at the people who had barely filled them out. "I have been giving out the first round test for Chunin exams for many years," Ibiki said, his voice filling the room. "Just for my legendary 10th questions." The task force moved back to the sides as soon as the tests were piled on the front desks, and Ibiki spoke once more. "Every year, I successfully weed out the ninja who aren't ready to become Chunin by changing the question. Given the large number of genin this year, I would like to offer a gift to each and every one of you." The room was filled with snickers. Even though most people had never met Ibiki before, any present from the intimidating ninja seemed like a good joke. "This is my gift to you all. If you'd like, you have 2 minutes to leave the room. But be aware that the cage has prudently granted me the power to deprive you and your team of your rank and to forbid you from ever re-entering the shinobi ranks if you choose to stay and attempt to answer my final question and fail. Naturally, your team will have to leave with you if you decide to do so. But that might be an unintentional gift to your fellow soldiers. Now is the start of your 2-minute window." Silence fell in the room as Naruto's heart leapt to his throat for the 10th time in the last hour. Was this man serious? Had the Hokage really given Ibiki permission to do this? What about the other cage? Naruto had never heard of anything like this before. Could it be that? The ninja beside Naruto slammed his hands on the desk and got up suddenly, perspiration streaming down his face, interrupting Naruto's thoughts. I quit." Not surprisingly, no one found the situation amusing at all. "I'm sorry guys, I failed his first test," he yelled, his voice cracking embarrassingly. "I was caught cheating twice and was unable to locate the answers to any of the questions. No way, no way, no way." 30 seconds into Ibiki's 2-minute window, and a team already began to file out of the room. Naruto could tell from faces of that guy's teammates that they were relieved themselves. After the first team went, several other people followed suit, followed closely behind by their angry or relieved teammates. Naruto couldn't help but shake his head and take a deep breath to calm his nerves. There was no way he was going to quit, not after everything he had been through. Something sounded fishy about this last question. Ibiki had already failed around half of the hundreds of ninja who were in the room. It was impossible to think that he would fail even more than that with a final question, let alone ban each failure from ever becoming a ninja. The more Naruto thought about it, the more he realized something. Ibiki was tasked to weed out the weak, as the man had claimed himself. But he was already doing that right now. The people who were leaving were ninja who were weak, afraid to take on a challenge. There were life or death situations on the battlefield where every decision you made would determine whether you or your friends died, and you had to trust your teammates with the same decisions. You put your life in their hands, even knowing that if they failed, you might end up with a kunai in your unsuspecting back. If there was one thing Naruto had learned during his time in wave fighting for his life in an A-rank mission, it was that hesitation and fear weren't something that belonged on a ninja team. Each time his life or the lives of his team were in danger, and he couldn't help but feel as though Ibiki was mimicking that moment right now. To quit now would be to abandon his comrades in their hour of need, and to quit now would be to accept defeat and fail the mission. I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. Naruto recalled that the Hokage himself had taken his class on top of his own tower in front of the Hokage monument to recite it together. At one point, every academy student was required to memorize a portion of the Shinobi Creed. Ibiki declared, "There are only 30 seconds left. This is your last opportunity to save. I will always place the mission first." Even Ibiki was silenced by Naruto's voice, which caused most people to turn and stare at him in shock. Heat rose to his face at an incredible rate as he realized he had accidentally said the first part of the creed aloud. He attempted to appear as confident and proud as he had just felt, but fortunately, before he could die of embarrassment in his seat. The second part of the creed, "I will never accept defeat," came from a Kiri ninja Naruto had never seen before, and it came in a low voice from the left side of the room. However, before everyone could identify the speaker, a second voice came from somewhere else in the room. This time, a female voice that sounded a lot like Hinata said, "I will never quit." Naruto turned to face her right away, and to his surprise, tears were streaming down her cheeks as she gripped her seat so tightly that her arms were trembling with stress. "A fallen comrade will never be abandoned by me." One of the many things that Naruto would never forget in his life was the shocked expression on Ibiki's face when almost everyone in the room yelled the last part of the creed at once. It wasn't a particularly loud shout, but to be fair, you wouldn't fully understand how loud defiance can sound unless you've been sitting in the silent room for the last hour. The 15 seconds of united, defiant silence that followed the shout, during which not a single ninja rose to depart, may have been even louder than the shout itself. An hour later, "Konoha, you pass." Even though he was relieved that everyone in the room had passed the first test, Ibiki hadn't given them any time to rejoice because there wasn't a 10th question, other than simply remaining in the room. Instead, they had to report to the Forest of Death entrance, which is located just outside the village, within an hour. Naruto and his group paused to take a collective deep breath after leaving the academy building, albeit via a less well-known exit to avoid the throng of relieved genin. Naruto smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Well, that was an interesting first test, with Sasuke looking like he had just been beaten and Hinata looking like she was about to. For the first minute or two, all he could do was stare at Sasuke helplessly, and anywhere else but the sobbing teammate pressed into his chest. Suddenly, Hinata broke down in tears and frantically embraced Naruto, not giving him the forceful hug one might expect in this situation, but then, this was Hinata, and Naruto wasn't expecting an embrace at all. If anything, Hinata's sobs intensified when he returned the gentle embrace, and Naruto paused to glare at Sasuke, who raised his hands in defenseless defiance. Sasuke pantomimed an urgent hugging motion at him, and Naruto took the hint and wrapped his arms around her. Anything is better than standing there uselessly like he had been for the past eternity, or so he thought. An incoherent, was mumbled by Hinata, and Naruto seized the chance to discover what he had done to her. "What were you saying?" he asked softly, grabbing her by the shoulders to pull her away from his chest. Her face was dripping with tears, just like his shirt was now, and Naruto involuntarily concluded that tears were not appropriate for his female friend. In fact, he would sooner break a bone than see her in this state again. "I was so close," Hinata whispered, unsure if Sasuke could hear her words. In order to avoid making her cry again, Naruto wisely decided not to ask the obvious question. "Just before you began the Shinobi Creed, I was about to get up and quit. I was sitting on the edge and was too scared to use my Byakugan, so I forgot that I had won until the last 2 minutes of the test, and I didn't get a single question right." Both Naruto and Sasuke's eyes widened as they realized how much closer they had been to failure than they had previously believed, and he looked anxiously at his male teammate. "Being a ninja is my dream," she fortunately added, since Naruto was at a loss for words. "It's your dream, it's our dream. The idea that I was the reason you and Sasuke couldn't be ninja was too much for me to handle." Though even he had his doubts during the test with himself, Naruto chose not to tell her that it was unlikely that Ibiki had ever made such a dramatic deal with the cages. The walk to the Forest of Death had been quiet and a little awkward, and when he looked back, he wished he could say that he had given Hinata a big smile and assured her that everything would be fine and that he had complete faith in her as a teammate, but instead he had uncomfortably patted her on the head, which made him cringe inwardly at his own incompetence. Hinata had only needed 10 more minutes to apologize and tell them that she was ready to go, and by the time they merged with the larger group of genin by the forest gates, Naruto was wishing the next test had already begun. As usual, he looked back and saw that he didn't really want to start the second test, and that if he had turned around and given up there, then maybe. The second test start. You dirty little maggots, pay attention. Naruto might have made a remark about the outfit to Sasuke if Hinata hadn't been standing next to him, suspiciously observing him closely. The next special jonin that appeared before the large group was a female with outrageously colored purple hair. If he hadn't known that Sakura had natural colored pink hair, he wouldn't have believed that this jonin's was natural either. And an even more outrageous outfit that seemed to be composed of tight-fitting clothes that left nothing to the imagination, barely covered by a tan trench coat. Naruto only needed to hear 2 sentences from the special jonin to realize that, despite her attire, she probably had no guy problems. My name is Anko Mitarashi, and I will be in charge of this second test here. Quickly and clearly listen. Ibiki may say that his test is the hardest on the mind, but I promise that you will be put to the test more than you have ever been in your pitiful little lives, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Furthermore, I'm not at all bluffing when I say that only half of you will pass this test. There was no question in anyone's mind that she was. My test's objective is to assess leadership and teamwork under pressure, and where could you find more stress than in my beautiful Forest of Death? I'll tell you all why my forest has such a fitting name. Some of you in this group will perish right now. After she painfully pronounced the final 2 words, the group fell silent, and Naruto swallowed uneasily, knowing deep down that she wasn't lying. Ibiki's test threatened to take away your ninja titles. My test will threaten to take away your life, Anko added, a sly smile spreading across her face. If that thought scares you, it should. Feel free to leave now if that idea is too much for you. Every year since I've conducted this test, I receive complaints from relatives of the deceased genin all over the nation, so I'm sure your families would understand. However, after I burn those letters, I can rest easy because I would rather the weak perish here than on a mission where civilian lives are in danger. Her smile managed to spread across her face when no one made an attempt to depart. It's possible that Ibiki weeded out the weak and pathetic. After all, that was his job. It's my responsibility to filter out the unusual. My forest will eat up anyone who is not Chunin material, so only the best among you will pass this test. It's true that only half of you can succeed at most, but only a third will. Let me introduce you to my forest, she went on, her voice sounding militarized. Everything is set up to kill you behind these big, seal-protected gates. There are tigers the size of houses, rats the size of tigers, thousands of mosquitoes the size of your hands, carnivorous trees that will grab your feet with their roots and drag you under, flowers that will paralyze you if you even breathe near them, a scorching sun, nights that will freeze you to the bone, and hunger that will gnaw at you until you may turn to cannibalism, as some genin have done in the past. You have a straightforward mission. There is a tower in the middle of the forest, miles and miles and days away from where you are right now. One of 2 scrolls, the Earth Scroll or the Heaven Scroll, will be distributed to each team. Only weapons, a map, a compass, and a red flare gun, which you can use to alert my task force that you and your team have given up, will be entering my forest aside from the scrolls. You and your entire team must bring an Earth and a Heaven Scroll into the tower in order to pass my test. Yes, that implies that the team as a whole will fail if one of your teammates passes away, gives up, or gets lost. It also means you have to steal a scroll from another team before you get to the center. You have a week to finish this. Indeed, a whole week spent in the Forest of Death. In 3 days, the quickest teams will most likely arrive. The slowest teams are still out there, somewhere, most likely in the roots of ravenous trees or the bellies of enormous tigers. I will reiterate the rules for clarity, Anko said, giving the genin a moment to process that. Take a scroll from the other side. Reach the tower. You have a week. Stay alive. Additionally, you will fail if you open the scrolls before entering the tower. Do you have any questions or quitters? Naruto glanced around, hoping that someone would inquire, if only to postpone the inevitable. A whole week? His thoughts returned to the survival lessons they had been learning in the academy, including which plants were edible, how to skin and cook animals, and how to take care of a fire. He hoped he could recall everything. Can we kill people? The red-haired Suna ninja, Naruto's nickname for Gaara, caught Anko's and almost everyone else's attention. Although there was already a significant gap between him and the next closest genin, that gap grew instantly as people shuffled nervously away from him. Yes, Anko replied solemnly, you will be assigned to kill repeatedly as a chunin. It will be your responsibility to protect. This test will ascertain whether you can kill people while still defending your team. Following her speech, all of the teams filed through a series of tents where each team was given a map, a compass, a red flare gun, and either a heaven or earth scroll. Although Naruto had only been warned, he had to resist the urge to open the scroll before putting it into his handy side leg pouch. Near the end of each tent were a number of ninja stores, all of which sold items that seemed useful for the test, but he didn't end up buying anything because he already had a special sealing scroll in one of his pouches that he always brought on missions, which contained his bedroll, a sleeping bag, and a few other necessities that he had sealed away into it. The final station was a pat down, where several chunin patted him and his team to ensure that no contraband items were entering the forest. Naruto couldn't help but smile and feel sorry for the chunin who had to pat down Gaara. Later, by the time the second test began, all of the teams were dispersed around the forest's edge, and Naruto knew that the first and last genin teams were miles away. He couldn't even see which teams were on his left and right, but he knew they were far away because a task force chunin was sitting bored around a rock near their entrance, likely having been there since the morning, if Naruto had to guess. How are things going, guys? He called out to them as Team 7 walked up to their respective gate. He was obviously happy to see a Konoha team. It was a matter of pride between the villages, after all, to see how many of their teams made it to the finals. Did Anko spook you all? Every squad that has passed me thus far appears to be prepared to throw up. Pissing himself wasn't all that different from how he truly felt at the moment, Naruto huffed in amusement. The chunin must have realized this, because he got up and wore an apologetic expression. Hey now, he began once more when Team 7 arrived. Most Konoha chunin had to take this test at some point, and I passed it as well. Additionally, the Hokage mandated that all jonin take this test. Their situation is more difficult as well. The jonin arrive here in bigger groups and spend roughly a month rehearsing for team and squad leadership roles. The chunin sighed slightly when that didn't seem to lift the spirits. Alright, guys, calm down a little, you're making me anxious. You have a brief window of time before the horn sounds and all the other teams line up. I'll have to open the gates at that point and shut them 5 seconds later, whether you're in or out. So, until then, try to think of a plan. I'm not supposed to assist you, but will you run a few miles straight through the woods? Or will you try to attack another team right away by running sideways? Divide or remain together? Consider such things. Following his advice, they gathered in a small group outside the gate, with Naruto taking the scroll, Sasuke the flare gun, and Hinata the map and compass. As they walked over, they determined that she would be the best guide for them because of her Byakugan and her proficiency with land navigation from the Academy field training exercises. Naruto finally said, I think we all can agree for now that we should stick together, and Sasuke and Hinata both nodded in agreement. Nobody liked the thought of having to part ways in the woods. Sasuke suggested that Hinata be the lead ninja in a wedge triangle formation. She will be able to see all of the important terrain features, any enemy ninja, and any traps set in our path if she has her Byakugan up while we are traveling. It was brilliant thinking. This way, if it rained or they fell into water, the map wouldn't be ruined. Hinata took out the map and laid it flat in the middle, and he realized that she must have laminated it at the store, something Naruto hadn't even considered. Her voice was still a little shaky, but her hand was steady as she began. I think we should cover as much distance to the tower in a straight line today, pointing a pen and drawing a dot at a specific spot. But we shouldn't stay there for more than just the first night, Naruto said, examining the point carefully and attempting to read the map. It appeared to be in the middle of a wooded area, near enough to a swamp that another team would not likely come from the west. We won't have to worry about ambushes or traps if we run directly there, but if we stay, we'll constantly have to worry about enemy attacks from the east, south, and north the next few nights. In the hills over here, if we can locate a cave or something, then we'll only have to worry about enemies coming from the entrance, she said, pointing to the sizable hills to the northeast of the position. We'll have better security, sleep better, and our location won't be revealed by any campfires we build inside. Both Naruto and Sasuke nodded, impressed with their teammate, Naruto especially happy that she had bounced back from her morning breakdown and was once again displaying her strength. After establishing a strong base, we can scout the area and attempt to ambush other teams that are approaching the tower, he said, adding his own thoughts. Hinata's Byakugan can assist us with that, but if we end up getting separated, it will be simpler to get back to our camp. In the next few minutes, they planned a few more small things, but they were interrupted by 3 distant horn blasts that were loud enough for everyone to hear. Naruto and his group got to their feet, but the Chunin, who had been standing nearby and nodding in agreement with their plans, immediately informed them. Just the warning blasts are that. It indicates that everyone is set and that we must be prepared to open the gates at any moment. Good luck, everyone. The Chunin went to the gate, where he pressed a button of some kind that caused a yellow light to shine over it. Naruto jumped from foot to foot, suddenly brimming with excitement and nervous energy, realizing that this was it. It was either life or death once more. But Team 7 was ready. They were Konoha's best. They were finalists in the making, he said with a smile. 5 seconds, the Chunin had warned them, before the gates would close behind them or in front of them, sealing their fate. The last horn sounded, loud and triumphant, and the gates instantly sprang open as the yellow light turned to green. It was a distant thud behind them that signaled that the test had really begun, that there was no way out but forward, and Naruto couldn't help but smile again as they leapt to the trees, propelling forward with chakra-boosted jumps. He would make Shisui proud of him, and he would protect the 2 people closest to him no matter what. Hinata leapt forward, with Sasuke and Naruto on her left and right. By the time the gates closed behind them, they had already well into the forest. Just a second before, there's been a change of plans. Standing before their own gate, Masahiro and his 2 teammates, Karen and Suigetsu, turned around when they heard their sensei's voice. Suddenly, a man wearing the Akatsuki robes approached the group, his large straw hat covering the upper half of his face and a high collar covering the lower half, and they knew that the kanji 6 was on the back of his robe, even though they couldn't see it from the front. The Konoha Chunin, who was standing by the gates, said, "Pardon me, sir. The Jonin sensei are not permitted to be here at this time. You ought to have been informed earlier about where." Masahiro, the robed man said again, ignoring the Konoha Chunin, "You will no longer open the scrolls in the middle of the forest like we had planned," he said, momentarily quieted by the evil aura the new Akatsuki was emitting. "Instead, proceed as you usually would. It's forbidden for you to fight Gaara. Is it clear that Gaara is expected to advance to the final round?" The robed man nodded in response to the hooded redhead ninja's glare. Good, the robed man said. "You simply need to advance to the final round if you want to have the opportunity to face Gaara. Furthermore, your team doesn't need to face the Konoha team I previously mentioned. Hidan's team member Gurren and I will handle that. Yes, I will no longer be in charge of you as of right now, and—" "Sir," the Chunin interrupted frantically, "you are not permitted to speak to your team. It's against the rules, and I'll have to disqualify you if you don't leave right away." A snake, thicker than any snake any of them had ever seen, sprang out of the robed man's sleeves faster than it took to take a sharp breath of surprise. Masahiro's hood flew back as it passed him, and when he turned to follow it, his eyes were fast enough to meet the eyes of the Chunin, who now had the unimaginably large snake biting into his neck. His eyes were wide and rapidly filling with tears of pain and fear. The look of a man who knew he was going to die. But before he could even let go or screamed, the snake swiftly ensnared the Chunin. Masahiro's eyes hardened as the next few moments were filled with the sound of snapping tendons and cracking bones. The man seemed to scream out for a brief moment, but the roaring of the horns and the opening of the gates deafened any chance of him being heard. Karen, his female teammate, gave an audible yelp of shock, but he was wise enough to remain silent. Sasori had warned him of Orochimaru's erratic temper, and the last thing he wanted was for Orochimaru's wrath to turn against him. What was Orochimaru doing here? What would the Amikage do if he learned that Orochimaru had killed a Konoha ninja? Was this the Amikage's doing, or was Orochimaru going rogue? Orochimaru turned around and gestured for them to follow him, but before he vanished, he chuckled as he walked calmly through the open gates, grinning. Come on, the fun is only getting started. The orange glow of twilight filled the forest glade as the sun was just about to set, and Team 7 came to a stop. They had decided that it would be best to establish some kind of base while there was still enough light, and it appeared that they would only have an hour or so before nightfall. Fortunately, Hinata's Byakugan had made the several hours of travel since the start of the second test largely uneventful. To avoid obstacles that Hinata could see for miles, such as giant bugs, swamps, and, as Anko had warned, tigers, they would have to veer slightly to the left or right every few minutes. A curious part of Naruto wanted to see if the tigers were as big as Anko and Hinata claimed, but he happily followed Hinata and circled the area where she claimed to see them for half a mile. They ultimately decided to camp in a comparatively level area of the forest. Although it wasn't the best place for a base and its defenses weren't the best, they had made every effort to keep the closest teams at bay, so it was unlikely that they would encounter any fighting tonight. However, Naruto was happy for the impending rest because, in addition to the exhaustion of traveling at a breakneck pace, the faint clashing of metal and the sound of distant explosions had kept his heart pounding. Pulling out their individual sealing scrolls, they formed a tight circle. Naruto spread his out on the ground, rolling it out all the way to a minimum of 20 feet. Circles of intricate seals encircling the scroll held the various objects Naruto had packed. He had made sure to write down what he had kept in each seal, so he pressed his chakra into the bedroll, tent, campfire, and blanket seals from right to left. He turned to his teammates and said out loud, "Let's center everything around the campfire. That way, we only need one and we can share the." When he saw Hinata clutching wildly at her pockets, he trailed off. She looked at them both with obvious panic on her face when Sasuke noticed as well. She blurted out, I can't find my sealing scroll," as if the enemy might hear her. "I brought it with me. I spent so much time packing everything, Trying to force a friendly smile, Naruto interrupted her with a swift hand gesture. "It's alright. I have more than enough stuff in mine," he assured him. "We can share, too. Right now, we need to worry about food for the night. I don't know about you guys, but I'm starving." Sasuke gave a nod. With a playful twinkle in his eyes, he said, "Me too. Neither of you happened to sneak any food in, did you?" Wishing he had at least attempted to take a chance, Naruto shook his head and shrugged. However, the task force had made it very clear that food from outside was not permitted. They looked through his scroll as well. Sasuke went on after Hinata shook her head as well. But there was some truth to his joke. "Alright then. I'll go out and look for some food. If the tigers are as big as houses, that means there has to be a lot of game around," he said. Hinata said in a low voice, "I can search the vegetation for any edible plants or spices." Naruto paused to reflect. "I could finish setting up camp for everyone," he stated. "By the time you guys get back with food, I can have the campfire set up for cooking and our tents set up. I think my tent is large enough for us to share, Hinata, unless you'd rather sleep outside." The slowly fading light made it impossible for him to tell, but Hinata nodded even though it appeared that she was blushing and avoiding eye contact. In his opinion, sharing a tent with someone is preferable to sleeping outside and running the risk of being cold and wet. He shrugged and interpreted that as a yes. "Okay." Sasuke clapped, attempting to dispel the silence. "If I'm not back in, let's say 2 hours, then you and Hinata can come looking for me. Same thing with you, Hinata. We'll come looking for you if you don't come back in that time." After a minute or two of hasty preparation, Hinata nodded, and Sasuke and Hinata left in separate directions, both of their Dujutsu activated. Immediately after their departure, Naruto began preparing the campfire by excavating his own small pit and arranging the stones he had unpacked in a small circle. He unpacked his slightly larger tent and set it up across from Sasuke's, making sure to use the back of his kunai to hammer down the stakes. Sasuke's tent was set up a few feet from the fire. This was a stable arrangement, but if they had to leave quickly, he could use his jutsu to quickly reseal everything he had. He didn't realize how close he and Hinata would be that night until he had spread the two bedrolls side by side. His own face flushed a little, and he thought of Hinata's first response. He attempted to persuade himself that she was merely a teammate, but she was a very attractive girl, and he was a guy. She seemed to get more beautiful every day, and he seemed to get more. With a sigh, he combed through his blonde, spiky hair. Adolescence. He cursed the idea. If it only meant that his body was getting stronger, it wouldn't be too bad, but when he thought about girls, his mind started to wander to unsavory places, and when Hinata was near him, he lost his ability to think straight. He pondered whether that was the reason Hinata occasionally stammered nervously around him, but Sasuke never experienced any issues with this. By the time both of his teammates got back, the sun had set and the forest was only faintly illuminated by the small campfire that Naruto had started using a basic fire technique, aside from the pale moonlight. He had initially been a little let down by the sight of several rabbits cooking over the fire, but now his mouth was watering from the aroma of the meat and some of Hinata's spices. Sasuke had exclaimed, "I killed a huge boar," after Naruto had given him a dissatisfied look while using the rabbits. "It was massive. It was as big as a bear, I swear it. But I realized that I had absolutely no way of carrying it back to camp, and it would take an entire day for us to try and prepare to eat it." Their discussion soon shifted to how they would arrange their sleep cycles for the evening after the delicious dinner. Naruto shook his head when Sasuke asked if he could simply make his clones pull security. His clones would be as exhausted as he was now, and they would undoubtedly nod off. Even if they didn't, he assumed that his head would be so drowsy that he would be useless as soon as they dispelled it. He was certain that emotions and feelings undoubtedly passed back through the clones because he recalled the peculiar feelings that had returned to him from a clone named Saito. Thus, they agreed on 1-hour shifts, with Naruto going first, followed by Sasuke and Hinata. A helpful genjutsu was used to partially hide the fire, allowing its warmth to be felt while reducing its brightness. The fire wouldn't last long enough, and searching for more wood would be annoying, but it wouldn't last more than a few hours. In addition, they had made the decision that they didn't want to risk being discovered and have a fire burning all night long, genjutsu or not. In the midst of the night, Naruto sat upright in a nearby tree, keeping his ears and eyes alert for any threats. Long before they saw him, he would see chakra approaching him because his Sharingan was also activated. He couldn't help but look toward his own tent, where Hinata was sleeping at the moment, as his guard shift was coming to an end. He inhaled deeply and resisted the urge to blush at nothing. Tonight wouldn't be the first time he'd slept close to her on missions. When his time was up, he pushed Sasuke inside his tent to wake up. Sasuke reluctantly got up and leapt into the same tree where Naruto had been a minute earlier. He crept into his own tent and eased himself into his sleeping bag, trying to be as silent as possible so as not to wake Hinata. It wasn't cold enough yet, but he had his extra blanket out in case, folded between him and Hinata, because he knew how cold the nights would get. The nights were extremely cold because of something about sleeping on the ground. Even though it may be sweltering during the day and the middle of summer, you may perspire yourself to sleep, but in the dead of night, you will find yourself shivering and wishing you had more warmth. He grinned warmly as he recalled some of his earliest forest sleeps during academy field exercises. Iruka had to give him his own blanket because he had been so cold and trembling so much that he had woken up multiple people during his mini seizures. In order to prevent suffocation, he completely zipped up his sleeping bag, leaving only a tiny opening the size of his thumb. It was barely a minute before he began to gradually saunter into Naruto-kun. Hinata's voice caused Naruto's eyes to pop open. He turned to his teammate after reluctantly unzipping his bag. "It's not your turn yet, Hinata-chan," he replied in a low voice. "You can go back to sleep." He heard her turn toward him in her bag. Her face could not be seen because the tent was too dark. She started slowly, as though she had something important to say to him. "I know, but," she said. "Thank you, for today. I would have made it through the first test if you hadn't spoke up." Naruto's thoughts kept returning to the written exam. It was only this morning, but it felt like days ago. She unexpectedly went on just as he was about to laugh it off and tell her not to worry about it. She remarked, "You're always there for me, in more ways than you know." He couldn't agree with her more, but he wasn't sure what she meant by that. He would always be there for them as best friends and teammates. "I just want you to know that I'll always be here for you too," she added in a low voice. I know about Madara Uchiha. Sealed inside of you. It's you. You have such a heavy burden, with both the Kyuubi and Madara. But I'll still be here for you too." He was suddenly relieved that there was no light inside the tent as his eyes grew wide. How did she know about Madara when his face was only a few feet away from hers? He was the only one who knew about it, along with Jiraiya and, it seems, Hinata. Did Jiraiya do something? He wanted to be upset with Jiraiya for telling Hinata, but instead he felt relieved by what she said. She still cared for him even though she was aware of who he was and what he owned. He could never have hoped for a better friend than Hinata. In the end, he just said, "Thank you," hoping that she wouldn't notice the tears that were starting to fall down his cheeks and that he could express everything with those two words. Good morning. At dawn, Team 7 was prepared and ready to go, eating whatever was left over from the previous evening for breakfast. Around 0430 may seem early, but after staying up all night to pull security, spending an hour on the line, and then sleeping for 1 to 2 hours, it's exhausting, to put it mildly. Everyone was eager to get up and go, and nobody was getting enough sleep. All of their bodies and minds were worn out after a day of mental testing, several hours of running through the woods, and only 4 hours of sleep, not consecutive ones, either. Hinata silently activated her Byakugan, took out her map in one hand, and walked out in the direction they were going. Without turning to face them, she said softly, "Is everyone ready?" Naruto made sure they had left nothing behind and double-checked that he had everything, particularly the Earth Scroll. In order to keep Ninja from noticing that a team had spent the night there, Sasuke had even covered up the fire pit. As soon as they exchanged a nod, Hinata leapt to the trees, and they quickly followed in a blur of motion. They had a fairly straightforward goal for the day. Today would be spent establishing a strong base, ideally in a cave, so that in the event that they were separated, they would always have a way to reunite. They still had 6 days to obtain a heaven scroll and make it to the center building. Being better hidden and protected would allow them to sleep better, and they would probably be able to reach the tower in the daytime once they located the scroll. The forest was harsh, and the movement was exhausting. They could either move in a straight line toward the mountainous region Hinata had indicated on her map as the base, or they could continue in their current direction, which was more akin to serpentine motion. It might seem simple to head straight ahead, but they would have to cross small mountains and swamps, and something would always seem to get in their way every 10 minutes or so, whether it was an enemy team at one point or something else entirely. After 3 hours of the exercise, Naruto's legs began to feel heavy and were becoming more difficult to lift. He realized he wasn't alone when he looked left at the sweat-covered Sasuke. Hinata must have been able to see them both because she finally slowed them to a stop. He and Sasuke landed beside Hinata on the thick tree branch. Even though all 3 of them were breathing heavily, Naruto asked the usual. "Why'd we stop? Is there something up ahead?" After shaking her head and dabbing at her perspiration, Hinata folded her map and put it back in her side pocket. Naruto could see through his own Sharingan that her chakra flow was dangerously low after she deactivated her Byakugan. Since she had never used it before, he was genuinely amazed that she was able to maintain it for as long as she did. In response, she said, "I need to rest," confirming his observation. "I'm starting to get a headache from the Byakugan, I'm sorry guys." Both of them waved her away. Sasuke got to his feet and hastily brushed off his pants. He said, "I'll do a perimeter check then," as his eyes flashed red. "Make sure there are no enemies or traps. You guys can rest here. I'll be back in half an hour." Above, I have to say, Utakata, Gurren-chan is really missing out. This is awesome. Utakata grinned at Kimimaro, his commander. Lying against the side of his large airborne bubble, they were both hundreds of feet above the forest canopy, floating peacefully with the gentle push of the wind. Their female teammate, Gurren, had left on her own as soon as the test started yesterday, refusing to accompany them. If he had to guess, he would wager that she would locate the dark-haired Uchiha boy she had encountered the day before. He couldn't contain his laughter. He thought to Kimimaro, "Perhaps Gurren will end up stealing a heaven scroll from them, and we won't have to do a thing. But how are we going to meet up with her?" As though that clarified everything, Kimimaro raised his hand and wriggled his fingers to reveal the commander's ring. "The Amekage can communicate with the commanders through the rings he gave us," he explained. "For this mission, he tweaked mine a little with your chakra and Gurren's, so that I'll be able to track you too. It's like a compass almost. I can feel the faintest pull when I push chakra into it that leads to both you and her. Still, I wonder if it was a good idea to let Gurren have the scroll." He closed his eyes once more, shrugged his shoulders, and nodded. The Chunin tests were really tedious. Even worse, he felt like a pawn in a scheme that he was completely unaware of. But it didn't really matter to him as long as he could just stay in his bubble. And in less than a minute, he was asleep, snoring softly as devastation and death occurred below them. Ground level. Sasuke realized that he ought to have turned around and alerted his teammates right away when he saw her chakra. He recognized her before he could, though, and his pride blazed up like a wind-blown fire. Furthermore, foolishness and pride go hand in hand. He landed quietly in a tree just above her, leaning coolly against it and gazing down at her. He was correct. The blue-haired girl who had attacked him yesterday at the ramen stand was kneeling on the forest floor and examining her map, which was lying on the ground. He asked her loudly enough for her to hear, "Are you lost?" She had turned to face him on her feet faster than he would have liked, and a crystal like the one she had previously created had materialized on her forearm. In any case, Sasuke waved to her and grinned confidently. He smiled even more when he saw the expression she made when she realized who he was. "Were you tracking us? I'd lead you back to my team, but I'd rather not waste their time." "You," she hissed, her face clearly showing her anger. When Sasuke noticed how much hatred she could fit on her face, he nearly lost his cool. What exactly was wrong with this girl? Jumping to the ground, he was still a good distance from her but near enough to the tree to lean against it. He was candid when he said, "I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. I've never seen you before. I've never killed any girl's parents before either, and I've never been anywhere near aim." She squinted at him, and she continued to point the crystal at him as though she might strike at any moment. "I don't know what game you're playing," she said, but you're the spitting image of the guy who killed my parents. And I remember it clearly, like it was yesterday. You couldn't look any more alike." At this, Sasuke raised an eyebrow. He asked himself, what if I told you that I had an older brother that looked just like me? People used to say all the time that we looked like twins, or rather, people used to say that I looked like a younger version of him. He continued after noticing that she lowered her crystal a little when she heard this. "If I were to guess, I'd say that you're looking for my older brother, not me. But if you're planning on killing him, you're too late." Her face was now filled with anxiety as her crystal-bearing arm fell completely. With her anger not nearly as intense as it had been a few moments before, she called out to him, "What? Why? And why should I believe you?" He gave a casual shrug. "You don't have to believe anything I say. But Itachi Uchiha is no longer in Konoha. I don't doubt that he killed your family. I guess it must be a personal hobby of his, seeing that before he left, he killed all of my family too. My entire clan." The anger left her face for the first time since he'd met her, but only for a short time. He couldn't quite read the expression on her face this time, but she raised her crystal at him once more. She said, "I don't believe you," as though she were trying to persuade herself. "And I don't care about the rest of your team. I was sent here to kill you, and I'll do it gladly. And after I kill you, I'll look into your clan, and if you're telling the truth, I'll kill your brother." He gave a humiliating snort that turned into a laugh, even though he didn't mean to. Naturally, the chuckle developed into a loud laugh. He raised his hand apologetically, trying to gather himself before she jumped at him. With an honest smile, he said, "I'm sorry," to her. "There are two things you need to know. Itachi is a dead man, but you are not his killer. As soon as I become strong enough, I'm going to hunt him down, and I'm going to kill him myself. It's my destiny, my goal in life. It's also a family matter. I'm sorry about what he did to your parents, but he annihilated the Uchiha clan, and as the last true Uchiha born into the clan, it's my duty to bring him the justice he deserves. Secondly, if you were strong enough to kill Itachi, then I'd already be dead, or rather, you wouldn't be taking this test in the first place. You might look at me with a lot of hatred in your eyes, but when Itachi looks at people, they die. Just from his eyes alone." Her gaze shifted from his Sharingan to his, as though she was having trouble deciding what to do. At last, he pushed off the wall and grinned at her while pointing to his own eyes. "If you want to fight me, then so be it," he replied. "I need to test my own powers against people like you, so that my Sharingan will be able to match Itachi's one day. I'll warn you first though, your hatred isn't stronger than mine. Not even close. Not even close. So test yourself against me. Gurren, was your name? Feel the power of my hatred towards Itachi, the necessity of my revenge and desire to live, and then you'll know for sure." He waved her toward him with a flick of his wrist, and so she did, rashly, furiously, and to her death. She ran toward him, proud of his Sharingan and his increased power over the last few months, and Sasuke grinned. He had 3 tomos in each of his eyes, which were nearing completion. Normally, he could tell what kind of jutsu would be used against him before it even started, but to his surprise, his enemy was developing a strange chakra, and even though he could easily follow her hand seals, he had no idea what kind of jutsu would be used. He was more ready to face her than ever after his fight with Haku, and he knew that he should anticipate Crystal. She put one hand on the arm with the crystal growing out of it after she had closed the gap between them. The crystal transformed from a dagger into a lance more quickly than he had anticipated, and as he pushed it forward, it closed in at a breakneck pace. With the crystal still attached to Gurren as she approached him, Sasuke simply stepped to the side without even flinching as the dense tree behind him burst in bark. While the rest of the world was almost motionless, he flew through hand seals at a speed even faster than hers. Innocently, fire ignited his hand as it crept up inside of him. However, he closed his hand into a fiery fist and punched forward before she could even move. Since her momentum was still strong enough to propel her forward, she was able to defend herself by somehow covering her other arm in crystal to deflect his attack. She was sent flying back to where she had just fled from, skidding across the ground until she painfully collided with a tree, as her crystal broke and flame exploded in a fiery blast. The fact that she had been able to get back up so fast surprised him. Parts of her clothing were burned to a crisp because he had poured a lot of chakra and flame into his first. However, she continued to stand, indicating that the fight was far from over. He had previously allowed her to attack first out of rage, and since she misjudged his speed, he had received a strong blow. But he wouldn't even allow her this time. He leapt forward, his Sharingan assisting in directing the trajectory of his Shunshin as he pushed chakra into his feet. She was unable to make seals with her hands before he arrived. He didn't have time to practice his own jutsu, so he just grabbed her face and used his momentum to lift her off her feet just enough to slam her into the ground. She was already unconscious when he let her go. After kicking her over until she was on her back, he leaned down beside her and applied pressure to her neck with his kunai. She would be killed by a swift cut to the throat, and Kimimaro's squad would be eliminated. He abruptly recalled what he had said just now. Itachi has most likely murdered this girl's family. He had no idea why, but would he complete his brother's work? This girl had nearly lost everything to Itachi. Would he accept the remainder? He flipped his kunai and put it away, cursing, feeling almost ashamed of himself for being so pitiful. If he was so wavered, how could he have caught up to Itachi? He got up and started to walk away, but he couldn't help but glance down at Gurren, who looked genuinely lovely when her face wasn't twisted into a vile frown. Their lives had been ruined by Itachi. He did not have to murder her. Later, about 30 minutes later, Sasuke returned to the team, and to their surprise, his clothes were worn, as if he had just returned from combat. The fact that he was smiling and holding a scroll surprised them even more. He began by throwing the scroll to Hinata after landing on the same branch as them. "Don't get too excited," he said. "It's only another Earth scroll. I took it because if we're lucky, it will disqualify Kimimaro's team. And even if it doesn't, having a spare scroll ought to be useful." Sasuke swiftly described what had transpired a few moments prior when their eyes displayed both shock and incredulity. "Sincerely," he said, "I got lucky," and turned off his Sharingan. "Kimimaro wasn't with her. I can tell that she's really strong, but she was angry and she totally underestimated me." Hinata and Sasuke looked at Naruto in shock as he asked ominously, "Did you kill her?" His reply was just as ruthless. "Remember that if she dies, her team is automatically disqualified. We could have beaten Kimimaro's whole team." Sasuke shook his head slowly. He paused and stopped for a moment, silently cursing. You're right. But I realized that Itachi probably killed her family. Just like ours, Naruto. And I didn't. I don't want to talk about it. Let's just get moving." With a sigh, Naruto accepted Sasuke's choice. "Fine. We ought to move quickly. Finding her here might mean that Kimimaro and the other AIM guy are close by, and we definitely don't want to fight them." That was enough to inspire Hinata to use her Byakugan once more and leap forward, followed closely by Naruto and Sasuke as they moved out into the hills to establish their base. Glade in the forest. Gurren was not happy when she eventually came to. Very dissatisfied. The fact that the Uchiha had taken the Earth Scroll away from her as soon as she woke up and that she would have to explain how she lost it to Kimimaro and Utakata didn't help either. Damn it all, she could almost see the smug smile on Utakata's face. The appearance of the one other person she most definitely did not want to see was possibly worse than everything else. She was unsure if her eyes were deceiving her, but she felt a strong chakra presence across the clearing, and she turned in time to see him emerge from a tree. Literally, he emerged from the tree trunk as though he could walk straight through it. "Gurren-chan, I was honestly expecting you to put on more of a show for me." Orochimaru moved slowly across the little clearing until he was in close enough proximity to her to not need to speak loudly. Gurren took a little step back, then swore at herself for showing such blatant fear. But now, in the midst of the exams, she didn't know why Orochimaru was here, what was happening. But nevertheless, Orochimaru went on, gazing at his fingernails as if he had no other interest. "You've partially fulfilled the purpose I had for you. If you could have killed Sasuke with ease, then he would have been a waste of my time. I guess I'll have to see for myself what his true potential is." Gurren found it extremely awkward to stand silently in front of Orochimaru. Something instinctive told her to flee, both in the back of her mind and in her stomach. She felt as though her life was on the line, and she had to fight off the feeling with all her might because it was growing stronger by the second. She said, "Orochimaru-sama," if only to break the frightful silence. He gazed at her with an expression akin to hunger. She wanted to fight the urge, but she shuddered. "Why are you in the Chunin exams? If they find out, your team will be disqualified and the Amikage will?" "Ha," he said, laughing at her, essentially interrupting her. She was reminded of her desire to flee by the ominous laughter. He raised both of his hands to her, wriggling his fingers and smiling wildly as he said, "What the Amikage doesn't know won't hurt him." Gurren pondered the meaning of this, but before she could inquire, her eyes widened in shock. None of his fingers had the commander's ring on them. That might only indicate. He said, "Do me a favor, Gurren-chan," and turned to leave slowly. "You were always one of my favorites within the organization. You have such potential, and such hatred within you. I'll let you live today, if only for that reason. If you ever want to become strong, if you ever want the power to kill Itachi, come find me, and I will train you like my own." Gurren nearly ran out of things to say, but she was able to ask the first thing that sprang to mind before he left. So then Sasuke wasn't lying. It was his brother who killed my parents. Orochimaru chuckled heartily. Yes, he said following a brief pause. Itachi killed your parents, and far more impressively, the Uchiha clan. And you won't have to look for him either, he's already joined our wonderful organization. And he'll likely be replacing me once the Amikage realizes what I'm planning. Group 8. The others stopped instantly and without hesitation when Kiba raised his hand to signal them to do so. As was always the case, Kiba was the team's lead ninja and used his nose as a guide, spotting danger long before the others did. He started, several ninja up ahead, about 400 meters, as Sakura and Shino touched down on the tree branch beside him. He sniffed a few more times and nodded when his young ninja hound, Akamaru, whimpered softly. At least 6 people, so probably 2 teams are up ahead. Akamaru and I can both smell one of them who has a pretty powerful chakra. What do you guys want to do? He glanced at both of his teammates. As stoic as ever, Shino silently adjusted his dark sunglasses, and when he glanced at Sakura, she sighed. She finally informed him, I think we should recon the 2 teams, after it became clear that Shino would not speak. If the 2 teams are fighting, that means that one of them likely has the scroll that we need. And whoever wins the fight, we can ambush them as soon as we can. Hopefully they won't have too much energy left. Kiba nodded in agreement with her, eager to join the battle at last. On the first full day in the woods, it was getting close to afternoon, and he was eager to grab a scroll and leave after spending the night in fear of an attack. He glanced inquisitively at Shino. The bug ninja merely gave one head nod. The ninja team that wins is too strong for us. I'll plant my allies on them and we'll know where they are for the rest of the test and avoid them, he said quietly, grabbing Kiba's and Sakura's attention right away. They swiftly made plans for what they would do in the event that they were discovered or the conflict escalated, and then they cautiously closed the gap on the 2 groups, opting to remain high in the trees to keep their position hidden from the crunching of the loud leaves below. They had to slow down and divide up, but finally they managed to get settled in a few trees where they could see and hear the ninja below by peering around the branches. The trees they selected were high enough to allow for escape in the event that the battle intensified, yet close enough to see and hear below. This is your last chance, exclaimed one of the distant ninjas. Kiba managed to grab a grass ninja headband by squinting down. The 3 ninja appeared to be older than him, almost in their 20s, so they were probably experienced even though they were still genin. Surrender your scrolls or we'll be forced to kill you, Akatsuki or not. Kiba's gaze flicked to the 3 ninja nearest to him at the mention of Akatsuki. He couldn't see their ninja headband because they were facing away, but based on the grass ninja's claims, they had to be Akatsuki. Akamaru, who was now lying in his lap, started to whimper softly once more. He took another deep sniff and realized that the ninja who was supposed to be in front of him was the one with the strong chakra that he had previously been able to identify. Despite wearing a hood, Kiba could tell that the lead ninja must have spoken to his 2 teammates because they gradually moved away from him. What was happening? Would one ninja be able to defeat a whole team on his own? A strange, deep crimson hair fell to the lead Akatsuki ninja's shoulders when he pulled back his hood. His next statement was loud enough for Kiba and the other ninja team to hear. Enough talk, he spat out sharply, his voice laced with venom. I've let you live long enough. The crimson-haired Akatsuki raised his arms without waiting for another signal. Long-bladed chains had whipped out of Kiba's sleeves and closed the gap to the ninja in front of the grass team by the time he had blinked. The ninja had drawn a kunai and was ready to break free from the chains, but before they could reach him, they sank into the ground and snaked through the air like water. The metallic clicking of the chains continuing to move forward and into the ground filled the next few moments. The grass ninja must have realized something because his eyes widened, but before he could turn around, the chains that had been snaking through the air behind the team suddenly erupted, ensnaring the bodies of the 2 teammates who were too slow to even turn around. Kiba would have looked away if he had known what was going to happen next. He would have turned his head. All he could do, however, was watch in wide-eyed horror as the chains tightly tightened and sliced through the 2 rear grass ninja, leaving behind only a heap of body parts and a momentary stream of blood that covered the remaining grass ninja. Kiba was afraid that his own muffled gasp might have given away the location of his team if the grass ninja hadn't screamed in fear. However, the scream was short-lived, and the chains swiftly went back to the Akatsuki's sleeves, allowing the grass ninja to turn around with his kunai raised, albeit trembling in terror. The grass ninja's face twisted in anger as he held the kunai so tightly. Angrily, he opened his mouth to yell something. The grass ninja stabbed his own chest with his kunai while the Akatsuki ninja twisted his wrist. He seemed to be as perplexed as Kiba as to why he had just made the decision to end his own life, as he gazed down at it in shock and terror. He was able to cough up blood and spit out. How? He sank slowly to his knees and then completely collapsed on the ground. Kiba completed the task without waiting for the Akatsuki ninja to approach. The last scream of pain and cries for assistance from the grass ninja reverberated through the forest trees with a haunting desperation that chilled him to his core, but he and Team 8 were actually quite a distance away. Naruto, Team 7. Something went horribly wrong when they were just a few miles from their target. Naruto and Sasuke jumped alongside Hinata as she abruptly signaled for them to stop. However, he experienced a terrible chakra surge that was unlike anything he had ever experienced before he could even ask her what she had seen. He could see a huge chakra discharge appear a short distance away on the forest floor in front of them as his Sharingan was activated. The sheer volume of chakra that was randomly released was enough to create a growing pit of fear in his stomach and the suspicion that he might have been able to see the chakra without a Dujutsu, even though the Sharingan was obviously not made to see chakra from a distance. Team 7 silently collapsed to the forest floor, rapidly settling into their battle formation and rearranging their small triangle. There was no time for hesitation or fear now. Now was the moment to make a life or death choice if the chakra they all possessed simply felt anything. Hinata replied softly, "One person is standing about 100 meters in front, to them." They circled around the target to get closer to him after nodding and leaping into the trees. They could signal to one another to start the team ambush once they all had a clear view of the target, and ideally the battle would end in a matter of run. Naruto's heart seemed to skip a beat when he heard Madara's voice, which was so faint and nearly unrecognizable due to the sheer amount of panic it contained. At that moment, his mind was racing with ideas. How had Madara been able to get through to him? Why did he worry so much? Nonetheless, the general consensus was that he and his group had to. A dark and powerful chakra emanating from the strange man now laughing in the middle of Team 7 caused Naruto to stop mid-breath on a branch as his muscles tensed due to an unexplainable feeling of fear and dread. He consequently fell forward gradually but steadily until he completely fell off the branch, plummeting through the air for a horrifying moment before painfully hitting the ground and landing on his back. He was instantly knocked out of his breath by the contact, and even though it hurt, it was sufficient to drive back some of the initial fear as he was able to move his body somewhat again. The man exclaimed loudly, "What a pleasure to find myself in the presence of such company." His voice was somehow malevolent in and of itself. Team 7 of Konoha. A team so talented at such a young age, with such potential that hasn't been seen since the likes of the Sannin. Trust me when I tell you that I am more than willing to pass on my old position of Sannin to a bunch of new kids like you. Between painful gasps, Naruto was able to look up and verify the awful reality. Orochimaru, Konoha's renegade Sannin, was in front of him. He could hear Sasuke and Hinata straining to get up somewhere in the distance. They had apparently fallen to the ground like he had. "I've taken the time to come all the way out here to greet you three and congratulate you on your undying desire to be Konoha ninja, even in the face of adversity, given that your clans have all but been wiped out, I must stop myself before I reveal too much. Just think of our encounter as a little test. Nothing more, nothing less. I would love to see how your abilities have grown. Let me know if your Kekkei Genkai has truly died with your clan, or if you three live to carry on the ancient names of Senju and Uchiha." Naruto had been frantically trying to get to his feet for the past few moments rather than listening to what the man had to say. He had just gotten to his feet when a kunai flew toward him and was picked up by his Sharingan. With the last of his remaining willpower, he flung himself aside, gasping in agony as the kunai cut across his cheek. He felt like screaming out as the new pain sent shockwaves through his body, but at least he was able to move again. He wasted no time in getting his teammates into a fighting formation. With an enemy like this, nothing would work. The best he could do was create a big enough distraction so Sasuke could use the. Orochimaru went on, reading his mind in some way. "Oh, and before I forget," he approached Sasuke, who was kneeling, and absent-mindedly reached into his pouch to retrieve the flare gun. Their only means of survival in this situation. In just a few seconds, the flare gun disintegrated into nothing after igniting in a purple flame without even a hand seal. Naruto launched himself forward with a chakra-enhanced leap, hoping to ram into Orochimaru with his back to him, even though he knew it would be in vain. Instead of surprising him, Orochimaru just turned to glare at Naruto once more just before he got to him. This made Naruto freeze in mid-step, pulling his arm back and drawing a kunai. Orochimaru calmly said, "Oh, look what we have here," and stepped forward to get close to Naruto. So you're the first one to fight back. To be honest, I came here for the full-blooded Uchiha and Senju. I wouldn't dare experiment with someone like you. But I am dreadfully curious as to how someone born outside of the clan was able to fully assimilate the Sharingan, as my spies have told me. Very well. I will test you first, nine-tailed. A thump. From a boot to the head, Orochimaru flew off to the side, hitting a nearby tree with a distinctly loud thud. Naruto was startled to see Hinata standing in a fighting stance, staring defiantly at Orochimaru, panting heavily in front of him. His name is Naruto, she exclaimed to him, her voice free of fear, and we'll fight as a team. Soon after, Sasuke was standing beside her, and Naruto got up as well, feeling a little more confident. He would fight to the death to defend his teammates if he were going to die today. Orochimaru got up too, flexing his neck as though the blow had not even affected him, and he laughed loudly. Very well, he remarked, observing the group's attitude. I'll test you as the team. It will save me time regardless. Don't go easy on me either. If you three are strong enough, I might just choose to spare you. There was no more waiting for Naruto. The real battle was only getting started. In a half seal, he raised his right hand, and a shadow clone materialized just above Orochimaru, already swinging his leg down to try to kick his face with a glimmer of wind. In a strange way, Naruto was almost able to appreciate the speed Orochimaru displayed when he effortlessly swung his head to the side to avoid the kick, since an attack this quick would have taken most people by surprise, and Naruto had already taken many people by surprise. He was just as perplexed by what transpired next as his clone. As if he weighed as much as the smoke he swiftly spread into, Orochimaru's tongue sprang out of his mouth, trapping the airborne clone and smashing him to the ground with unfathomable strength. There was a prolonged period of silence as Team 7 gaped in astonishment at Orochimaru. Hinata appeared to be about to become ill, and Sasuke had ceased creating seals in mid-jutsu. What? Orochimaru exclaimed, seemingly amused by their expressions. Was that really everything Team 7 could throw at me, a measly shadow clone? Or have you never seen someone use their tongue in battle? Some jutsu you won't just find lying around in a library. Some jutsu you have to go out and find yourselves, invent yourselves, or steal yourselves. His tongue slithered out of his mouth once more and sped in Naruto's direction with his last word. It lifted him off his feet and wrapped itself around him before he could do anything, even with his Sharingan activated. He was aware of what would happen next. Naruto unconsciously used the Kawarimi with a nearby stick behind Orochimaru as Sasuke started flying through more seals and Hinata dashed forward with her hands laced with chakra. His body exploded with smoke as the tongue slammed him into the ground, exposing the remains of a broken twig. Naruto materialized behind Orochimaru, who laughed. He muttered, not bad, as he avoided a jab from Hinata and deflected one of Naruto's kicks. You have a Byakugan as well? Now that is something that piques my interests. Orochimaru skillfully flipped into the air when avoiding Hinata's blows became impossible, only to be met by a barrage of tiny fireballs that he miraculously avoided. He appeared in front of Sasuke in an instant after landing and using a shunshin. As Naruto and Hinata pursued him, Sasuke was able to block and avoid his attacks, which were almost a blur to Naruto's Sharingan. For a while, they engaged in a 3-on-1 taijutsu battle on the forest floor. Had it not been a life or death scenario, Naruto might have chuckled at the comforting sensation of facing someone so swift and strong, as though none of their blows were significant. No, Team 7 hadn't faced someone with such rapid taijutsu since Shisui, and even then, they were younger and less skilled. Not even Kakashi was comparable to this. Orochimaru vanished in the midst of them before anyone could gain the upper hand. Hinata yelled, "Up there!" as her Byakugan spotted him in the trees far behind him. Orochimaru extended his hand down toward them even as she was speaking. Blood trickled down his arm. Had they been able to cause any real pain? Oof! A gigantic snake, bigger than any animal Naruto had ever seen, leapt down toward them from a huge cloud of smoke. The sight was so horrifying that he would have spit himself out if he hadn't been going to die. Fortunately, Team 7 was able to leap to the side before the snake's head buried itself in the ground, causing a burst of dirt. With a quick roll back to his knees, Naruto asked himself, what in the hell was that? He glanced at Orochimaru, but his attention was always pulled back to the enormous snake that was now peering its head and hissing its tongue out of the enormous cloud of dust and dirt it had just produced. Whoa! Anything was better than nothing, but he wasn't sure if he knew any wind-style jutsu that would be effective against a creature this size. In an attempt to produce the most cutting wind jutsu possible, he flew through a number of hand seals before landing on the open palm seal. With his hands still in the palm seal, he inhaled sharply and felt the jutsu rising inside of him. He released a torrent of wind that erupted and expanded just as the snake appeared to be ready to strike, striking it hard enough to push it back a little. It was impressive how much chakra Naruto had thrown into the technique. It was likely more than was needed for many A-rank ninjutsu. Although Naruto's vast amounts of chakra enhanced any jutsu, you could only do so much with lower-level techniques because his wind jutsu was only a C rank at best. This was made clear when his wind seemed to accomplish nothing more than pushing the snake back a little, a remarkable accomplishment considering the size of the animal. But this was not what he was attempting to accomplish. When he realized his jutsu was ineffective, he cut off the stream of air and released the seal. His thoughts swiftly whirled through every other scenario that came to mind. Naruto soon realized that none of the jutsu on Team 7 could penetrate the snake's scales, even as Sasuke started spitting fireballs at it and Hinata threw kunai. His only thought was to harm the snake from the inside out, but how would he do that given how swiftly the snake could strike? He might be able to perform a jutsu from within if the snake were to swallow him because it might be large enough to prevent his death right away. However, that notion screamed folly. There was a chance that the snake would crush him instead of swallowing him, that it would kill him during the swallowing process, or that it would pierce him completely with its fangs. He had few other options, though. He dropped several explosive tags on the ground behind him without thinking twice, marking them with his chakra to make a replacement much simpler. Although the user can switch places with an object nearby, most ninja must be within arm's reach of the object they would use. This is why the Kawarimi was never designed to be a form of teleportation jutsu. However, Naruto's vast and powerful chakra allowed him to swap out items farther than any ninja would ever attempt. With a defiant yell, he leapt into the air, hoping to attract the attention of the enormous snake. As he jumped to the top, the snake grew tense, as though it were about to attack. Naruto connected with the explosive tags he left on the ground to activate the first part of his Kawarimi without the need for a hand seal. In this manner, the Kawarimi would activate automatically if the snake chose to crush him rather than swallow him. He gave the snake a smile. "You slimy jerk, come get me, Sasuke." The snake struck out like lightning and sucked his teammate whole as Sasuke's red eyes widened. Sasuke thought his friend was a soon-to-be dead fool when the snake was about to strike out, but as soon as Naruto activated his Kawarimi, his eyes swung to Naruto. What a cunning fool! Even though he was now aware of Naruto's scheme, witnessing his friend being ingested was still a little. When Hinata cried out in shock and despair, "Naruto!" Sasuke's head snapped toward her. "Crap," he said to himself, realizing what was happening. She didn't see the switch, she thinks that Naruto is. He yelled in vain, "Hinata, wait!" as his female teammate leapt straight at Orochimaru. She was going to kill herself for no reason at all. Crap, 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 and more. Knowing that he wouldn't arrive in time and that the snake most likely had enough time to turn around and grab him in midair, he leapt after her. But something had to be done. The slimy bastard Sannin was already forming chakra inside of him. Sasuke would never have believed what he was seeing now if he hadn't been using his Sharingan to look. He had never seen Hinata do this before, but she started to create her own chakra inside of her while they were still in midair. Two distinct colors of chakra were swirling inside Hinata at the same time, merging and pushing out of her body, almost like when he had battled Haku on the bridge. Orochimaru stopped forming his own chakra in what seemed to be shock and amusement, suggesting that he must have sensed the same thing in some way. With a mad shout, Hinata jerked her hands forward, and hundreds of razor-sharp leaves flew out of her hands in the direction of Orochimaru at breakneck speed. The Sannin did his own Kawarimi milliseconds before the leaves tore him to pieces because he was unable to avoid the attack in time. The leaves sliced straight through him, and in a second he was bursting into mud. Sasuke exclaimed, "Crap," for the 1000th time that day. Since he had nothing else, he hastily drew out a shuriken and some of his ninja wire, hurling it swiftly around a nearby tree to avoid being hit by Hinata's ninjutsu. His eyes were wide with surprise as Hinata's leaves continued to shoot forward and spread out, pulverizing trees and slicing through branches like butter. He was jerked to the side as he swung around the tree, all too roughly. When her attack ceased, she rolled athletically to the forest floor, with dozens of branches falling all around her. A number of trees started to creak loudly before collapsing. Like Sasuke, Hinata was taken aback, but her expression hardened as Orochimaru approached them through the debris, remarkably unharmed. "Hold on, this is amazing." He wasn't safe. On his upper cheek, there was a tiny cut on the side of his face. There was hardly any blood trail, but it was blood. Indeed, Hinata had succeeded in injuring Orochimaru. Orochimaru calmly said, "My, oh my," as his abnormally long tongue emerged from his mouth to lick the blood from his wound. "What excellent blood you have running through your veins, young girl. A Byakugan and the Senju ability to combine elements. What a beautiful mix of spiritual and physical chakra. This certainly adds a new perspective to my." Whack! Sasuke actually managed to forget about the enormous snake for a few seconds, but it was destroyed with a thundering explosion, sending pieces of its long, winding body flying in all directions before it was ejected into smoke. Before the smoke cleared, Naruto and one of his shadow clones materialized on the ground next to Orochimaru. One of them approached him from below, while the other flipped in midair, surprising Orochimaru with their extraordinary speed. The vines that emerged from the ground at Hinata's command, enclosing Orochimaru's legs and securing him to the ground, were even more unexpected. Sasuke took a moment to reflect on how incredible his teammates were. However, despite having nowhere to go and being attacked by two people at once, Orochimaru was able to grab the clone's foot in mid-strike and throw him aside, while his tongue snapped out to lift the real Naruto off the ground and into the air. Orochimaru's strength and speed were truly astounding. With his tongue still supporting Naruto, Sasuke was able to hear Orochimaru utter the words, "You seem to be the least interesting out of the group, and certainly the most annoying. Let's see if I can get a little something special out of your seal here." Before the fingers of his right hand ignited in a deep purple chakra, dark and powerful enough to resemble flames, Orochimaru almost instantly grabbed his right forearm with his left hand. Then he jerked his hand forward toward Naruto's stomach with lightning speed. Sasuke should have attacked while the man was speaking, but he was unable to act in time. More than anything else, Hinata appeared shocked that Naruto was still alive. However, just milliseconds before Orochimaru's unidentified jutsu connected, his Sharingan noticed that Naruto had used his signature jutsu once more and replaced him with his shadow clone, who had been flung aside. Though he seemed to have lost his breath, nothing remarkable happened when Orochimaru's fingers made contact with the clone's stomach. In fact, the clone didn't even disperse. Orochimaru appeared more than unhappy. His tongue snaking back into his mouth, he said darkly, "Never thought I'd find someone who uses substitution more than I do," before launching the clone far away into the woods behind them. "It's annoying." Orochimaru vanished from view and then resurfaced right in front of Naruto, his fingers once more encrusted with purple chakra. The blonde ninja let out a painful gasp as he thrust his hand forward into Naruto's stomach before Naruto could react. Sasuke yelled, "Naruto!" and cursed his own tardiness. With a flaming fist, he was able to make the Sannin leap back from his friend as he ran toward Orochimaru. This battle had to be over as soon as possible, and whatever Orochimaru had just done to Naruto couldn't be good. Naruto, there was no way to describe the pain. Although it wasn't the most severe pain Naruto had ever experienced, it was the most peculiar, and he was unable to describe what was happening to him. He felt somewhat empty when he woke up in the hospital prior to the tests because he was unable to relate to Madara's conscience. The opposite was true of this pain. He had the impression that a strange power was being pushed through his body, and that gears were grinding in his stomach. The feeling was different from when Madara had previously taken control of his body. It seemed as though Madara took over Naruto's body and his mind vanished into the background. Naruto's mental state was not at all deteriorating at this point. If anything, a sense of anger and hatred that he did not know the source of was strengthening and enhancing his mind. He glanced up at his friends engaged in combat with Orochimaru. He had to assist them, he had to. He let out a painful grunt as he gazed down at his own hands, his body aching and filled with hate. In some way, his fingernails were becoming sharper, almost like they were growing claws. They were becoming claws. No, what on earth was happening? Hatred started to swirl powerfully in his mind, and the pain and power kept rushing through his body. He felt as though he was about to blow up as the chakra inside of him started to grow and grow. The chakra did then burst out of him, leaking from every pore, with a searing pain. He felt a little relieved that the intense pressure was gone as a bright red chakra started to cover his body. He discovered that his vision was excellent when he looked up to his friends once more. Superb in that he could zoom in on details impossibly well from a distance. He could see the almost dried out tears that stained Hinata's face as she leapt forward, he could smell the saltiness of sweat, and he could smell blood in the air. This was not superb like his Sharingan, where movements seemed slow and he could see chakra. A deep part of Naruto felt as though he should be alarmed, or at least confused, when a number of vines and wooden branches appeared to attack Orochimaru while under Hinata's control, but he wasn't. He was simply irate. When he turned back to Orochimaru, he frowned. He had a strong desire to murder that man. All he wanted was to tear the flesh from his bones and sink his teeth into him. The pressure started to build again, and he moaned. It seemed as though he had access to a tremendously potent chakra source that was leaking with hate. No, it seemed as though the chakra was overflowing within him. That bastard had done what? Sasuke fired fireballs at Orochimaru, filling the air with a spectacular display of light. Everything in its path was destroyed as leaves appeared out of nowhere and flew in the direction of the Sannin. Tree branches and vines appeared to fight as well, as though Hinata was willing the forest to fight the man. Although it was incredibly impressive, it was insufficient. That was visible to Naruto. The Snake Man had too much speed and strength. If this continued, he had to wake up, he had to assist, he had to fight, he had to kill. Orochimaru's head appeared to suddenly float in midair, his neck extending towards Sasuke like water, but he was too slow to duck. Before Sasuke or Hinata could take action, the Sannin sank his teeth into his neck. When Orochimaru's head came back to him, Sasuke let out a painful cry. But Sasuke fell to the ground, dead, and the cries were in vain. His hatred exploded inside of him. He intended to murder that idiot. He sprang forward, reaching for Orochimaru's throat with his claws. The Sannin grinned as he approached. The subconscious of Naruto Orochimaru laughed at the magnificent sight in front of him as he stood in front of the Kyuubi's gates, his hands placidly in his pockets. "My goodness," he exclaimed, giving a grateful shake of his head. "Tell me, Lord Kyuubi, how it was that you came to be. Did the sage truly split you from the great Ten Tails? Are you truly immortal?" A human voice said, "You ask interesting questions," from behind him. Wearing his ancient armor, Madara Uchiha leaned against one of the enormous walls of his host's subconscious. A smile spread across Orochimaru's face. "My god, so it's true, you were really alive all this time. And you were sealed in here along with the Nine Tails. I'm truly in the presence of history." Madara gave a silent stare in return. From behind the bars came the Kyuubi's low, impossible to hear growl, which shook everything like a mountain in motion. "It's one thing to read about ancient gods in ancient scrolls," Orochimaru added, turning back to the Kyuubi. "But it's another thing entirely to see a demon with your own eyes. Why are you here?" Madara got right to the point, demanding an answer with a tone akin to a knife's edge rather than posing a question. Orochimaru felt odd. He ventured to say, "I have a few questions of my own. If you would care to answer some of mine, I'd be more than happy to answer some of yours. One for one, maybe?" Once more, silence. Orochimaru pondered absently whether Madara could murder him here or if he would just be expelled. "Fair enough. Ask away, though I cannot speak for the Kyuubi, and we may share no more than 3 answers. I do not wish to share all of my secrets with you." Orochimaru looked happy. "How did you live so long?" he asked right away. "How is it that you can look so young but be over 100 years old? Have you achieved immortality?" Orochimaru was reminded by Madara's raised eyebrow that he was only allowed to ask one question, but since they were all connected, he didn't care. "It is not I who is immortal, but the Kyuubi. My longevity is merely stolen, nothing more." Orochimaru appeared dissatisfied with the response, but he was afraid to say anything more for fear of breaking the agreement he had just made. Instead, he waited patiently, expecting Madara to ask him a question. Madara gazed into his soul, his eyes a terrifying darkness despite the fact that his Sharingan was not yet activated. "I had come to believe that you were a member of this new organization, Akatsuki. Are you here on the Amikage's orders, or your own?" This was a simple question, Orochimaru said with a smile. "The Amikage has nothing to do with my presence here. I'm actually leaving the organization, although I have little doubt it will eventually cost me my life. The Amikage is a jealous god, after all." After hearing this, Madara's eyes brightened, but he said nothing, letting Orochimaru pose his query. Orochimaru started, "You seemed to disappear for some time before attacking Konoha, but Madara could already tell what was going to happen. What were you doing all that time?" "I was training," was Madara's succinct response, which made Orochimaru mentally curse that he wouldn't elaborate. However, he did. "I was training myself, and my disciple. I was discovering the secrets of the Sharingan and the Rinnegan." As Orochimaru struggled to come up with his final query, Madara smiled and asked his own question before he had a chance to think. "I am beginning to think that you and I are alike, Orochimaru," he said. "But tell me first, why were you truly banished from Konoha?" Orochimaru appeared pleased to respond. He laughed to start. "Oh, so you don't believe the stories I'm sure you heard? You're smart, but I should have assumed that you wouldn't, given that you were also banished. Well, how do I put this simply and succinctly? The council, led by Danzo, whom I'm sure you know, had wanted me to kill the Senju clan. This was to be the beginning of their grand scheme to destroy bloodlines, and when I initially refused after hearing their plan in its entirety, I suggested that instead of destroying all bloodlines, why not figure out how to create them? I had found scrolls at the time that mentioned Hakoda, the sage's brother, a man who was even less well-known than the sage and who wrote many of the bloodlines that exist today. I didn't believe the story completely, but I reasoned that if I could experiment on the Senju and Uchiha specifically, I could learn something amazing. My wish was granted by the council, but there was a deadline. I couldn't meet that deadline, as you can probably imagine, so the council set me up, exposed my desperate experiments, and sentenced me to death. Orochimaru found what he wanted to ask next, and he rubbed his hands together excitedly when he was done talking. Will you assist me in permanently destroying Konoha, Madara Uchiha? With our combined strength, Konoha will undoubtedly fall. After pushing off the wall, Madara moved to the middle of the opulent hallway and stood in front of Orochimaru, who appeared to think about it for a moment before answering. No, I hope you understand that I just don't trust you enough at this point, Madara said, but I can promise you that my ultimate objective is for Konoha to burn. However, Naruto Uzumaki, my vessel, is not yet prepared for my plans. If I know anything about this village, it will still be standing so I can destroy it later, but I will let you attack Konoha. We have different end goals, you see. You seek your own retribution, even though we both want to destroy Konoha. I don't set such low goals for myself. I want to become a real god, take over this world that God has abandoned, and use my strength to vanquish evil. I'm afraid of death, but I'm afraid of death because I've figured out how to defeat it. But I do not have that power just yet. Someone else in fact has stolen it from me. Orochimaru, should you survive your efforts to destroy Konoha, I believe that you and I can work together again, at some point. Would you be willing to listen to my final question? Orochimaru crossed his arms in defiance as he laughed. Madara didn't believe he could defeat Konoha, much less make it through the event. He was interested in Madara's last query, though. After all, he had hinted that they might collaborate in the future. Madara went on, his expression deadpan. I have grand plans for myself, and for this young vessel I'm currently bound to. But there is one man who currently stands in the way of my greatness. Tell me, Orochimaru, do you want to help me kill a god? In other parts of the forest, Naruto had never had a headache like the one he had when he regained consciousness. But before he could ponder what that feeling was, he needed to know why he was lying in the middle of what appeared to be an unfriendly bush, full of twigs and prickly leaves. Suddenly, though, something else came to mind, something different and deep within. He swiftly got out of the bush by swinging his weight forward and standing up, but his head started to spin, causing him to drop to one knee, feeling lightheaded. Where had he gone? What had taken place? Orochimaru. He had been thrown away when he attempted to attack after he and his group had been engaged in combat with the Sannin. Whoa, he knew that his friends might still be fighting, so he had to find out what had happened to them immediately. They were where? He glanced around, but was unable to find his location or get his bearings. Leaping to one of the surrounding trees, he tried to hear or see if anyone was close. He forced chakra to his eyes in the hopes of catching a glimpse of any nearby chakra, fighting the impulse to just yell out and possibly give his location to adversaries. Oddly, it seemed like activating his Sharingan required a lot more chakra than usual. That was strange, but he dismissed it as panic, and a sense of urgency started to take hold of him. He searched everywhere but couldn't find anything. Where were they able to? Not more than a few yards ahead of him, on a tree branch about the same height as his own, was a whirling mass of chakra shaped like a human. In order to see who it was, he had to reduce his Sharingan vision, while wondering how he had suddenly materialized in front of him. Orochimaru, was it? I'm looking for Naruto. I figured you could help me out, but... It was a light, friendly voice. Completely bewildered by what was happening, Naruto completely gave up on his Sharingan. His eyes, which appeared to be staring at someone he knew, widened in surprise when he saw the man standing in front of him with his typical eyes. The man appeared to be much older than Naruto, most likely in his 20s or possibly even his 30s, and his attire was typical for a ninja. However, the odd thing that shocked him the most was the dizziness soon returned, and Naruto had to kneel down and cling to the tree trunk for support once more. In an attempt to delay the man, he was able to call out, "What? Who are you?" He was not sure why, but he certainly did not have the energy to fight. He was barely able to stand. His whole world seemed to be slowly spinning. The man went on, "You definitely looked like Naruto at first," which made Naruto even more perplexed. "And I tried to communicate with Madara, but I couldn't." "Madara, I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the games," the man said, his voice suddenly much lower and darker. "Tell me I'm wrong. Look inside yourself for Madara. Or for the Kyuubi." When Naruto attempted to get back up, the world started to spin more quickly. Who was this man? He started, "I can't," regardless of whether he was disclosing his own secrets. "I haven't been able to talk with Madara since Jiraiya put a special seal on me." He was unaware of the exact moment when the man appeared on the branch beside him, crouched, and gave him a questioning glance. Naruto struggled to think clearly. Why did the man have on such an odd mask? He looked at Naruto and questioned, "No, that's not all, is it? There's more than one seal on you, that's for sure. I'm counting 3. The fourth, Jiraiya's presumably, and something else that probably doesn't mix well with the other two. Was there another seal placed on you?" Orochimaru. Now he recalled how the Sannin's fingers, dripping purple chakra, had hit him in the stomach. Was a seal there? The man sat down and said, "I'm feeling academic today. Tell me, do you know why the Kage Bunshin is a forbidden technique?" Naruto couldn't even stand this man and wanted to leave as soon as possible. He wanted to throw up. The man stated, "It's not just because of the amount of chakra it consumes," disregarding Naruto's silence. "Other clone techniques, like elemental clones, are not forbidden after all, and they take up a lot of chakra too. No, the Kage Bunshin is number 1 on most forbidden jutsu lists because it divides your soul. Or your conscience, depending on who you're asking. Did you know who invented the Kage Bunshin technique?" Naruto couldn't figure it out. He didn't understand what this man was saying. The man sighed in disappointment and said, "I forget his name, but he's dead anyhow. I read about how he died, but his shadow clone killed him." Enough of his mind, chakra, and soul went into a clone that he created one day that the clone was convinced that he was the real one, not the other way around. Of course, the clone couldn't dispel the real one, which infuriated him, so he ended up killing the man. I don't find it hard to believe, but can you imagine believing that you were real, but learning that someone else who claimed to be you could kill you with a flare of his chakra? I'm sure you could relate. The way he eased back into his lighter, higher, and friendlier voice was very odd. Naruto didn't think this man was right in the head. "But I digress," he continued, "but looking at you now, I can see 2 interesting choices. You weren't a part of my original plan, that's for sure. The first is self-evident. I murder you." As his head continued to swirl, Naruto was inadvertently nodding off from the conversation, but his mind immediately snapped back at this. His eyes widened in shock, and he made a last-ditch effort to escape the man, which caused him to fall from the tree and land painfully on the ground below. Fortunately, he hadn't been high enough that he could have cushioned the fall by pushing chakra into his limbs. "Don't worry, I'm not done yet," the man said, somehow right next to Naruto on the ground. How did he move so fast and quietly? Let me explain. You will either be killed regardless if I let you live and leave you alone, or you will be aware of my existence if I don't. Right now, I don't want anyone to know about me. I would kill you out of sympathy, though. The alternative I have is to let you live and take you with me. You and I would follow our own path together. You would learn new things from me about the Sharingan and ninja arts. Sincerely, I've been feeling lonely on my own. I have no one to recognize my brilliance. We might also join Akatsuki, as I'm thinking of doing so as well. However, I wouldn't let you join me until you responded to a few questions." Naruto needed to return to his team as soon as possible, but he had no idea what this madman was talking about. Hold on, had he mentioned that he would be trained with a Sharingan? "I know it's easier said than done, but it's possible," the man said. "Obviously, you'd have to be willing to leave your teammates behind. I've personally done it. We're both nobody in this world, people who shouldn't be here, people who don't matter, and perhaps that's why I like you, kid. Shadows of our former selves, abandoning everything. Everything is abandoning us. Could you tell me your name?" Naruto turned to face the insane man wearing the orange mask. Was that just his head, or was the mask spinning in spirals? "What? My name is Naruto Uchiha. Who the hell are you?" "No, you're not getting it. That will get you killed. What's your name? I can see a different name written in you, and if you can find it, then it means that you're something special, someone I can train. But if you can't..." "My name is Naruto, you crazy bastard. What have you done with my friends?" "No again. I'm the crazy bastard. You don't have any friends." In a futile attempt to clear it, Naruto shook his head. What was happening? He could only piece together a few sober thoughts at a time because his mind was still jumbled. He had the impression that something was dragging him somewhere, pulling his back. Returning to what? The man put a hand on Naruto's shoulder and turned him to face him. Maybe this will help, he said. Look into my eye. This is your last chance. What is your name? Naruto's heart raced and his breathing became labored. His mind was racing toward the hole on one side as he gazed up at the man, his world and the man's mask both spinning. There was only darkness for a moment as he looked into the hole. To his astonishment, however, Crimson erupted, a fearsome and formidable Sharingan that pierced his very being. Everything around him grew quiet. The mask froze. The Sharingan, however, whirled. If only briefly, Naruto was able to separate himself from the force pulling him back by reaching deep into his mind and finding what he was looking for. He discovered his name. My name is Saito. The man's Sharingan brightened with joy. Very good. Now, I'll ask you again, Saito. Do you want to survive? Hinata's forest of death. It had all happened so fast. No, that wasn't the most appropriate way to phrase it. It seemed like everything bad that could happen happened so fast. As the forest glade fell silent, Hinata made every effort to quickly assess the situation. Before her friend passed out, Orochimaru had bitten Sasuke's neck, causing him to scream in agony. Then, with his fingernails transformed into claws and a crimson chakra covering him, Naruto appeared to have suddenly leapt into the air. However, the Sannin had miraculously succeeded in swatting the claw away and grabbing Naruto by the neck, staring at him directly, before he could do any damage. He then put another seal on Naruto's stomach before Hinata could respond. Or had he taken a seal off? She was unaware of which situation was worse because she knew that Madara and the Kyuubi were imprisoned inside Naruto. However, Orochimaru just let Naruto fall to the ground, her best friend's crimson chakra gradually fading, and he called out to her while giving her a playful look. Hinata Senju, he had stated, consider me impressed enough to allow your team to live. I have little doubt that you three will become more famous than the Sannin ever were, if you can survive the Chunin exams. If you do, listen to my words closely, Sasuke will seek me out for power. Naruto will learn under Jiraiya. But what will you do? It would only make sense for you to seek out my other female teammate, a Senju by blood herself. Although you don't have to, your role in the events to unfold will be monumental, if only because the blood running through your veins. The Sannin had vanished with that. The majority of the man's words were too confusing for Hinata to comprehend, but they would come back to haunt her. But now that he was gone, she was by herself, her heart pounding, staring at her two teammates who were unconscious and lying on the ground a considerable distance apart. Now that her greatest threat was gone and her fear of dying was starting to subside, tears threatened to start streaming from her eyes, but she quickly decided that this was not the moment. Before the sun set, she had to hurry her teammates to safety. She vowed to herself that she wouldn't let them down now, when they most needed her.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.